I call this meeting to order. And John, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, one proposed addition to the agenda, which would be an executive session at the end of the meeting for the purposes of discussing a property acquisition for the Open Space and Trails program.
Okay, and I could at some point get the
Yeah, we'll get the citations.
revised statute number on that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a chance for anyone in the public who wishes to speak about anything that's not on today's agenda. You have the chance to do that, and I know that Mr. Butner is here. I'd like to speak, so you come up and sit at the table and state your name for the record so it goes on the recording.
Louis Butner. I live in Emma, so I am in Pitkin County. I'm here to put you folks on notice of a subdivision that was created in 2006 that is in violation, namely in error, of 17 state statutes. The major error in that is county land was used as part of the subdivision and has been deeded to the new owners of the lots of this subdivision. I have given you each a handout that goes into more detail. I would like you to turn to about page 11. It's the one with the paper clip on the bottom there. You'll notice that it is a quitclaim statutory deed made between the rancher, Shipley, and Pitkin County. There is as a statutory deed, it has blank spots to be filled in. On this, I see the deed as a conveyance of fee title. The subdivision has that deed as an easement for the road. There's nothing in this deed that says it is a easement. I go into detail in my handout, so I'm not going to take your time on this. This property, as part of history, one of the duties of a surveyor, was originally occupied prior to 1888, which was the first government survey of the lands to be homesteaded. That is why you have these lots on those in the deed there. That's basically it. The error, it needs to be corrected. And since these people have bought their lots, and part of their lots is county property, we have a mess.
Okay, Rachel?
Steve, I would like to give this packet to our attorney's office and ComDev to take a look at, review, and get back to us on. It's obviously very lengthy. I am asking one question, if you could answer it. What is the corrective action you think the county should take?
The correction action will be a new subdivision. And the people that have bought their property with county land being part of it, I don't know.
Okay.
The developer couldn't convey that property
Okay, I was just wondering if you had a suggested.
I have a solution, and I'm available to talk with anybody, but I don't want to take your time now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's why I wrote this up.
Thank you, Lou. We will get staff working on this, and then they can get in touch with you if they have questions or want further information from you, and we appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Part of my research on this, I had to go to Silt. That's nothing. But I also had to go to Denver. As I say, I have put in a lot of hours, a lot of dollars here.
Okay, well, thank you.
So I am available for consultation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou. Thanks for bringing it forward.
Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to make a comment at this time about something that's not on the agenda later in the meeting? Okay, are there any commissioner comments?
None for me today.
I have a couple of things. One, our community has lost a couple of longtime residents just during this past week, and I know that Mary Esbajes and Carter Jackson both were very influential in the Roaring Fork Valley. Mary, of course, living in Aspen and working for the Aspen Times for many years, and probably most of us, a lot of us have had our pictures taken by her and a little blurb put in the paper over the years. She probably attended more events than anybody else in this room during the course of her time here.
Combined.
Combined, probably, yeah. So she will definitely be missed in the Aspen community. And Carter Jackson is a rancher and former veterinarian. He was the large animal vet for almost every ranch in the whole valley for many years, and his ranch is just across from the Glenwood Airport, and it's one of the first ranches that was put into a conservation easement, and he remained active long after he retired as a veterinarian in the ranching community, and he has a wonderful family keeping on the ranching tradition there, and definitely he will be missed also. And second thing I want to talk about, the snow is melting along the sidewalks. It's really more like March weather right now, and with melting snow, all the accumulated little bits of trash that have been thrown by the wayside during the course of the winter are all showing up right now. And I always make it a point to try to pick up trash when I'm going for walks around on county roads or on the sidewalks around town. So if everybody who went for a walk would pick up one piece of trash every time they go for a walk, a lot of it would disappear real quickly. So I just wanted to pass that reminder on to people.
I just want
Patty.
to add something about Mary. I had the honor, I guess you would say, of the last couple of summers of working with her flowers. And this last summer, she asked me to find her some forget-me-nots because they were very special to she and Jim. And they actually have them in their property here on the street in front of their Victorian. And I couldn't get any to order for her, so I found another lady up in Mountain Valley who offered me the opportunity to come into her garden and dig them up and take them to Mary. And then Mary took them up to the cemetery and put them on Jim's grave. So whenever you see forget-me-nots around town, it's so you don't forget Jim and Mary. Yeah, very special.
Okay, any more further commissioner comments? Okay, moving on to consent actions. The first is approval of minutes of the work session of January 6th and the regular meeting of December 15th, 2014 and January 14th, 2015.
So moved.
I have a correction.
I'll second it and
Yeah, I have a correction on the minutes of January 14th. It should actually be that, I think Steve, correct me guys if I got my dates wrong, but I think Steve, as the vice chair, called the meeting to order, and that I was present because it was my first regular meeting.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay,
That's it?
is it acceptable to the first as amended?
Yes.
And it's acceptable to the seconder? Okay.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes with that amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, and thanks for pointing that out, Patty.
Sure.
The next thing is a resolution appointing citizen board members. And Charlotte's not down here. John, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in front of the board, from time to time, the board will do interviews for open seats on citizen boards. In this case, the board had conducted interviews and directed staff to prepare a resolution for appointments. That resolution is in front of you today. Making appointments. Sorry, I'm just working back to it. I was looking at this surveying report and got totally entranced in it.
You could be there a while.
So we have 2 appointments today. We have the Elise Taylor to Healthy Rivers and Streams Board, and Demi, I am not going to pronounce Demi's last name correctly, I'm afraid.
Demi Angela,
And Angelov
I believe.
to the Financial Advisory Board.
So moved.
I'll second.
Just a moment.
Just a comment, I noticed that Ellie Taylor's listed as a Down Valley participant for Healthy Rivers. I guess that depends on point of reference. Cemetery Lane used to be Down Valley. So, but she is a resident of Pitkin County, in fact, Commissioner District 5. And given the restrictions on that board's membership for individuals outside of the county, I just wanted to mention that. Perhaps we can clean that up before the board executes the actual document.
So she should be listed as Commissioner District 5
Yes.
instead of Down Valley representative.
Okay.
Okay, would someone add that to the motion?
Yeah,
have that
to amend, I would add that to the motion to amend the language.
Amen.
Okay, any
Thanks,
further
John.
discussion?
Just thanks to all of our citizen board volunteers.
Yeah, definitely, they're very important, and these are 2 very important boards, the Healthy Rivers and Streams and Financial Advisory Board are important ones for us, so we
And
appreciate the people applying for them.
Yeah, I would really like to encourage volunteers. It's really critical to the continuity of a community to have people volunteer, and the county really appreciates the time that volunteers spend. And I'll put an extra plug in for the Weed Advisory Board. It's really fun. Steve and I both served on that board, and it's really a great board to be part of, and we would really appreciate people showing an interest in the Weed Advisory Board. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Moving on to consent actions, first reading set for public hearing on February 11th. First one is the ordinance amending Title 8 of the Pitkin County Code, specifically the 2006 Land Use Code for Land Use Code text amendments. I'm not sure if that's worded correctly.
That's pretty close.
Close enough. And we have Mike Kramer and Cindy Hubin and Alan Richmond, private consultant here.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Mike Kramer with Pitkin County Planning Staff. And we are here for first reading, which is actually a public meeting to consider the special events land use code amendments. And we have first reading scheduled for today and second reading scheduled for February 11th. But we can talk about those dates and times as we talked about yesterday in our work session. But basically, we don't have a long staff presentation. What we'd like to do is to go through the actual strike-throughs and underlines of the amendments, if that's okay with you, Steve, and give you just a broad idea of how these amendments are structured, what they mean, how they're going to affect, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have some discussion points from yesterday's work session too that we're prepared to talk to the board about and discuss too.
So you guys can have a PowerPoint up here? Is that why the screen is on?
Yeah, I was going to put some overheads up.
Okay, that's great. I just was going to move. Oh, thank you.
Do you want to sit at Michael's seat here?
Don't tell Mike.
Okay, so the idea behind these land use code amendments is that we would restructure the code so that we can address events in the county, and that would include private events that are held on private property. The way the code is structured today, we regulate special events, for example, running events, biking events, events where there are public gatherings that they're ticketed and the public can attend. We also regulate temporary commercial uses. So for example, like if there would be a farm stand or a tree stand over the holidays, our code encompasses that too. What we don't encompass today in the code are non-commercial private events. So the way you've seen, or you have in the packet today, is that we have the definitions section amended for you. We have Chapter 2, procedures, and then that lengthy Chapter 4, which amends the land use code and includes all those tables that we talked about yesterday. So I thought maybe I'd start with the definitions and just put that up on the overhead so we can all see it and talk about it. But the idea here is that we would amend Chapter 11 of our land use code to delete our current definition of special events and include this underlined section for special events. I'll zoom in here. But basically, the definition of special events as we propose will include events that are the running events. They will include the ticketed public party events. They'll also include the private party events if they get over a certain threshold number, which we'll discuss in a second. What we're not trying to capture are events that are part of a day-to-day operation. For example, like the high school when the football team has a Friday night football game. What we're trying not to capture are churches where Sunday worship is happening, or a community center where we all know that events might take place. For example, like at the North 40 Fire Department, or they have a get-together, or an opening of the Mountain Rescue Aspen building. We're not trying to capture those. Those are places where we understand that events may, from time to time, occur. So we've included this in this definition. But what I'd like to just point out here to the board is that we have included these things. And as I maybe zoom in here too, we have included these ideas right here. Special events include but are not limited to athletic events, organized races and competitive group activities, entertainment events including concerts, carnivals, festivals or fairs, fundraisers, trade shows, weddings, block parties, neighborhood gatherings, and similar types of group celebrations. So that gives us a different definition in Chapter 11 and begins to try and capture an event that could have off-site impacts to a neighborhood or the community. This definition also captures non-commercial events too. Our second definition here, we talked about yesterday special event venues. A special event venue, as we proposed our land use code here, is actually a parcel of land where numerous special events will occur. And someone threw the idea of the Chaparral Barn, when we know that there are numerous special events that happen there. What we're trying to do in this definition is capture a property that gets designated and has multiple special events and call it a venue. This venue would be a special review to the Board of County Commissioners. If this language got adopted in this procedure, somebody could come in and ask for a one-step special review to the Board of County Commissioners, and you would have review authority at a public hearing to approve or not approve a venue property in the county. So these are the two big definitions that we have and that we proposed for this land use code amendment.
And I think is important on this special event venue, just to emphasize what Mike was saying, is adopting this definition would not give anybody the right to be a special events venue. It would give someone the right to apply to the Board of County Commissioners for a special use permit to be a special event venue. So I think it does two things. It, number one, puts the control in the board's hands as to whether these are or are not appropriate in any residential areas anywhere in the county. And secondly, if we have venues that are operating today without any permits, it now gives staff the authority to say, you are operating in violation if you are a venue and you do not have a permit to operate as a venue and you're operating in a residential neighborhood. So this is really meant to control what we understand to be a significant problem today and to put some powers in the board's hands for regulating these. And Mike will point out to you as we move on the standards that we've created to review these kinds of uses.
George?
I have a question just for clarification. So what's in front of us today is an ordinance amending the Title VIII, just as Mike has explained. If we were to approve that, that doesn't take into account any specific requirements or regulations from the different areas that you've worked on, whether it be urban, rural, or rural and remote. That's a separate issue?
No, that's all embodied in this ordinance in front of you. This is the full package with all the charts, with all the thresholds, with all the standards for across the board in Pickens County.
Okay.
Our expectation today, based on yesterday's work session, is that you will modify that by telling us what it is you want in this ordinance that would move forward today, and we'll go back and make those changes, and we anticipate continuing first reading if that's the direction you want to go.
So then we would have the ability to, can we separate out from this ordinance certain areas? We can
Yes.
separate rural from rural and remote?
Yeah, we've already started to think of ways that this can continue to function without those pieces in it. And
Okay.
that's very doable.
All right, thank you.
And then those are our first two definitions that we had drafted, and I just wanted to include this one in too in case there's any question on how filming would be handled. Filming and photo shoots in the county are, they happen commonly. Today we permit them. We would propose to amend the actual definition for temporary commercial uses and include this definition called temporary land uses and activities. And we have the definition here, and we've included this statement here. Filming of a movie, television show, commercial or promotional spot, and still photo shoots are also considered to be temporary land uses and activities. So this really wouldn't be any different than the way we do business today. We're just calling it something different, and we would still have someone apply and issue a permit to them when they wanted to film in the county.
Rachel?
It seems that in working on the filming thing before, we had come up with what I would call an exemption of less than so many cars and less than so much duration. I just think it'd be valuable to repeat that here, because this language makes it sound like all filming, even if it's just 2 hours or one person, and that's not the case. So I think we should just repeat the exemption.
That's a good idea.
However, this is just the definition of temporary land use, and don't you then later on in the code explain what?
It's in the standard section, but we can have it in both.
Yeah, my
We've got the
thinking,
exemption here in special event, we can have it in temporary land
Yeah.
uses too.
my thinking, Steve, is it's really hard sometimes for people not familiar to flip back and forth between the sections. And it just would give a lot of people relief to go ahead and see it right then and there that this doesn't qualify to what they're planning on doing.
Okay, we can make that change. So those are the two definitions that we have to Chapter 11. Attachment B in your packet, and then a lot of Attachment C. That's a lot of process language, but I'll just gloss over it quickly. What that is that special events and temporary land uses and activities would still be administrative reviews conducted by community development. Permit application submitted to us, we would review it and then issue the permit. If it was an event that had community-wide impact or had a lot of public discussion or something that we think the board would want to see and review and decide upon, we still have that authority to kick a special event application up to the Board of County Commissioners for review. That's still there. And those lengthy charts that you see in attachment B, that's basically what that says. Okay.
Mike, I just wanted to clarify, there's Ds, As, and Rs on the chart, and I presume that D means the decision-making, and that would fall in the staff by and large on this first, the upper part, which is special review and the special events and that whatnot. Then the decision-making on the one-step reviews is on the BOCC.
Mm-hmm. What those are, Steve?
And the review is on the staff to do the review. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so what you're looking at is that first page of attachment B, and that's the Chapter 2 review and approval procedures in our land use code. And what we've done is we have struck out the temporary commercial uses / special events portion of this and included temporary land use and activities and special events under the administrative review. What that D means in the land use code is review and decision by staff. And then if you keep on going over in that row, it has an underlined A. What that A means is appeal. So in a hypothetical situation, if staff would review and deny a special event application, that applicant could appeal to the Board of County Commissioners. And that's where you would have the authority to hear an appeal on that. Okay?
Okay.
In the one-step review on the next page, you're correctly identified special events venue. Now that's the venue application that someone could submit to get a venue designation on their property. And in this situation, this is a public hearing that where an application would be submitted, reviewed by staff, and then the D under BOCC in that column is a decision by the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay. So that would be like, the special events venue would be like a regular land use application where they do the pre-application meeting with you, submit the application, you review it, and then we make the decision.
Yeah, we would do a staff report and a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay.
You make the decision.
Okay.
Do you want comments on other sections of the code as it's going forward, particularly a special events venue section at this time? I was looking at the new section 4-30-50, and the two things I particularly noticed are missing is under A, it said, these are the things the staff will consider, whether events would occur indoor, within a permanent structure, or temporary tent-like structures. I think on the temporary tent-like structures, we have to have how long they intend them to stand. So that if someone was, I'm only going to hold 4 events, but the structure is going to be up for 4 months, we need to have that information to staff. And then I realize it may be specific to another section of the code and incorporated that way, but I don't see what it says about the posting, public notice, and comment period, specific to the hearing and decision-making about whether it'll be a special events venue. So again, I think it might be part of another section of the code, but I think it should be repeated here.
Well, it would be the you have one place where public noticing is placed in the code, and it crosses all land use
Right.
applications. And it requires posting and it requires mailing.
Yeah,
I
but we
don't
could
know
just
that
say, C section of the code here.
We could have a cross-reference
That
to the notice.
cross-references it, because the big part of this is to make sure the neighbors are aware of what's being proposed in their area, and they have a chance to comment on it to the board before, as consideration, and to staff as consideration of these licenses. Thank you. The other kind of very small labeling thing for me is Chapter 4, the Table 1. I think we should say special event thresholds, Aspen and Basalt urban growth boundary, you know, it should be within the urban growth boundary, but not in municipal town limits. Just so we're clear. And, you know, I just think that that would clarify the title to that little chart.
I think we'll probably be discussing these 3 different tables, 1, 2, and 3. 'Cause you'll explain those when we get a little further.
Rachel, just to also point out in our charts, in chapter 2, we have what's called public notice. And if you went down to special events venue, it tells you that very specifically what you need for the public notice events. And that's the way we try to pull it together so that it's all in one chart, so that it's easy for the public to know. If that works for you, it keeps the code a little cleaner than having to repeat everything. But, and also what we do in community development is we have a fact sheet that goes out on a lot of our processes. So say you wanted to do a site plan, we have a fact sheet that goes with that gives the public the notification that they basically know without having to understand the whole land use code.
Yeah, well, I can see it just being a reference, but, you know, to see a special events venue section under the chart or whatever, but it's just, not everyone is familiar with code, and telling them where to look helps.
What do the N, P, and M stand for specifically on the public notice?
Yeah, that means the N, P, and M. N is newspaper, so we would actually publish that in the Aspen Times legal section about the public hearing and the application date and time. The P is posting, which would be the big signs as you cruise around the county and you see those 24x36s. You'd actually have to post the property and say when the hearing date is and what the application is for. The M is for mailing, and the requirement is that when a public hearing is scheduled and someone has to notice with a mailing, the mailing goes out to all property owners within 300 feet of that property, and they'll receive that letter U.S. mail then.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Steve, can I ask on that? You know, I know that there's something here that we do kind of by protocol as opposed to code, and that is noticing the caucuses in an area. And does that need to be formalized or not? I hate to have 3 caucuses say, well, we were noticed and it was great, and our people got involved in one caucus saying, well, we didn't hear about it, just the neighbors within 300 feet.
We do that.
So we don't really need to have it in the code.
If you'd like to have it codified, you know, we can do that as well. I mean, we can always add that to our notice requirements, but we have that as part of our protocol, and there is as part of our website, you can go to our master list of applications, and a caucus will receive notice of what applications are in their area, the status, and it links to all the paperwork that goes along with our reports, the status of mailings, all of that. It's all part of one notice that anyone can pull up on the website.
Okay, and that, you know, as you explain it, I appreciate that, because that might confuse us. This is what the applicant needs to do and certify that's done, whereas the notifying of the caucus is something that's internal to us that we need to do. So I can understand that.
We have to generate what then they mail out, but it's still the applicant needs to do the mailing.
Okay,
For example.
gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thanks. So that is procedure and definitions, and we can certainly get into chapter 4 and what the larger underlined sections are. That's really the nitty-gritty of what we're looking for in an application, and trying to address the impacts that are anticipated with a special event. So, for example, noise, lighting, dust control if there's going to be large traffic generated on a rural road. We've also tried to ask the applicant to indicate and have time limitations on this, so we have some certainty with an event and for setup and takedown. For example, if somebody wanted to, another impact, if somebody wanted to have liquor service or provide food at an event, you would convene as the liquor board and consider an application for alcohol. Food service is covered by environmental health, and an application need to be submitted to make sure it's a licensed caterer. These are all things that we do in community development and have our understanding of our special events process, and it's just not codified. So what this does is it creates a section in the land use code that indicates to applicants what we need when we have a special event, instead of staff just trying to say, give us this, give us this, give us this. We need to understand this. We have it now here in front of us. And that's
What page is that on, Mike?
If you look at the roller number, I think that's the right name for it. The little bottom right-hand
Yeah.
number there. Those standards and requirements start on page 77. Oh, I'm sorry, 17. If you it would start on page 18 of the roller number. I was looking at two different ones.
Okay.
This was that list that we put up on the board yesterday, about 16 different areas that we may, and the thing on these standards, the language very clearly says the staff may apply these standards to a particular application. For many types of applications, some of these will apply, but others won't. So people aren't gonna have to respond to all 16. If theirs is a small event that might be a race that is going between 2 points, and there would be certain issues that would apply, but other issues wouldn't.
Okay.
And just from an administrative perspective, I'd like to add that Alan did a lot of research in different communities for us that have special events regulations. And we really, even though this looks like a lot of paperwork, we really want to minimize it as much as possible, just because we do not have a special events department. This is just part of the daily workload, and it's not something that we're sort of the point of the arrow on this, but many other departments and organizations are part of this review. Public Safety Council looks at many of these if they're large events. Also, you know, operation plans typically go with the Sheriff's Department. We refer these to the caucuses. Conditions come out of different people. We are just sort of the administrative arm of checking in with all these standards, just so you know.
Yeah. If it helps to give an example too, what Cindy's talking about is that we have the discretion to refer this out and convene a special events committee as we see fit. So I always like to give the example of the various types of special events that we see in the county. You know, large events like X Games and Pro Cycling Challenge, you know, we convene the special events committee and talk about it. Luckily, we've been doing those events for so long that I don't say we have down pat, because we certainly don't, but they move along quite swimmingly. But the array of different events we get, for example, like a film shoot where somebody wants to fly in a squirrel suit off Aspen Mountain, is a lot different than when a caucus wants to get together and have a party. The film shoot might require to have on-staff medical services there.
Or airport clearance.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So that's one type of special event, as opposed to when we all get together and have a community gathering. It's a different type of special event. And the nice thing is we get to tailor this review of these special events with this language here.
For example, for the X Games, talking about public notice, since we did have an issue over the weekend, what is the parameter of public notice? Because the X Games is so huge, of noticing the people who live. Is it just West Buttermilk fringe of the ski area, or do you know, Mike?
We actually, in the code today, we don't have a public notice requirement for special events.
But we will?
Well, the way we have it. Yeah, well, the way we have it drafted right now, the administrative special events are still not publicly noticed. But we certainly could do a notice of some type if we wanted to with special events.
Well, the problem would be, who do you notice for the bike race? Because you'd have to notice everybody, I mean, the public, it's going by everybody's door, you know, front door. So I think that you'd probably use your discretion and say, if we have like the X Games, maybe we need to look at the direct impact. And that's something we can talk about in more specific when we do our debriefing of the event, I think.
There's one section where we wrote a notice opportunity for the staff, and it's in the traffic control section of the standards. I don't know exactly which page it is. It's 2 or 3 pages in on the standards. We basically say the applicant may be required to post signs, hand out flyers door to door, or take out an ad in the local newspaper or radio if traffic is expected to significantly impact the residents of the area. So You know, that seemed to be the most obvious one where
Right.
you would be concerned.
So the
You
May
know,
is-
It could be noise, or it could be lights, as we see from the
Perfect.
X Games, which also might trigger that kind of thing.
And we currently do that with applicants today. If it's the bike race, the city and the applicant medalist sports go out into the county, notify people, work with caucuses, and get the word
Right.
out. And that's one of your conditions of approval.
So it's not mandatory, it's not like
It's a
special
may.
events venue where every single time it is a public notice. In this case, the staff will make the call and say, yeah, you better
Perfect.
let people know.
Okay, great. That's what I needed to know.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
We'll probably come back with some questions and comments later on different sections here, but.
Okay. So at this time, I thought it would be good to put up one of the tables we have proposed, so we could start looking at the thresholds and the different standards we look at. Is that okay, Steve?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a lot of talk about rural and remote yesterday, so maybe I thought we'd start with table 3 and go with the rural and remote table. So if you remember from our discussion yesterday, the way we drafted these land use code amendments is to divvy up and have thresholds and standards for different areas of the county. What we've done is we've created standards for the urban area, which is defined by the urban growth boundaries in the county. We've created standards and thresholds for the rural area, so everything outside of those urban growth boundaries, and then specifically designated thresholds and standards for the rural and remote zone district. And what we have up on the overhead is a table here. And we tried to delineate some different numbers and some different triggers to when a permit is not needed, to when a minor permit is needed, and then when a major permit is needed. And I'll use a pointer here. We've called this stuff out, and what we've done is we created a characteristics column here, and we've talked about the number of attendees, the number of events that would happen per calendar year, duration, size of proposed tents or temporary structures, if there'd be amplified music, if there would be fireworks, if someone would propose a helicopter for the event. We thought that these were some trigger points in an event review situation that we could start figuring out when something is so minor we don't need a permit application. When something, it's got some impact, we should have a minor special event review on this. And then in the third column, wow, this is a lot of impact. Let's have a major special event review. Let's consider kicking this to the Board of County Commissioners, and let's get the special events committee together to talk about it. And that's what we tried to do. And in this specific table for rural and remote, what we did was we thought attendance was an important number, or an important idea to think about with the impact of a special event. And in the rural and remote, we started with the number 25. And in this situation, this column, we thought that 25 or less, you didn't need a special event permit, everything else given. And the number we came up with was a number that actually the Forest Service uses for their mass gathering permit. And if you remember, the rural and remote zone districts are typically adjacent to Forest Service lands, public lands. So that was a number that we started with. We thought it was reasonable. It had some justification to it. And these numbers they can be amended as you see fit. These were only starting numbers that we had. So in this column here, if you have less than 25 people, it's only one time. It's up to 400 square feet for a tent, and all these other constants. We don't need a special event permit. We would just say, have a great time. Go ahead and do it. In a minor special event situation, you've got more than 25. There's a few more people attending. You can have 2 or 3 of those in the calendar year, and they're one day in length still. Here we've upped the threshold for tents. You can have up to 1,000 square feet of tents. So we thought in that situation that somebody could come in and ask, do you need a permit? Yes, we'll do a minor special event permit on that one, and refer it out to everyone and let the caucuses know, the neighborhoods know that that's going to be happening. And then the third column here is a major special event. And in this column here, we have actually some hard and fast standards that we want to instill in the rural and remote zone district. One is that you can't have a stationary gathering of more than 100 people. So parties of more than 100 are not allowed in the rural and remote zone district. The other hard and fast standard is that you can't have more than 1,000 square feet of tents in the rural and remote zone district. So you could have, so in a basic zoning scheme in our land use code, you can have 1,000 square foot cabin in the rural and remote zone district. We thought, okay, if you're going to have a major special event, you can have 1,000 square foot tent on top of that too. But those standards cannot be changed. And these are all, like I said, just numbers that we came up with and thought that these would be good starting points for discussion.
Rachel?
Well, it seems a little incongruous to me to say that, you know, it's not allowed, but you can have 1,000 square foot tent. So I get a little confused by that. I mean, the very first, you know, I thought you were saying a major event permit is just not allowed. The gatherings over 100 is not allowed. So you're saying that over 100, there is a major event permit allowed in the rural and remote zone.
Yeah, I think the things that would kick you into a major event in the rural and remote, if you had a multi-day event going on, that could be major. If you had live amplified music outside and the staff looked at the characteristics of that amplified music, and it's, you know, like we're gonna have a major band up there that is gonna be quite disruptive. So it's unlikely that you would get a major event in the rural and remote because frankly, we don't view that area as appropriate for major events. It is our remote portion of the county. But there were a couple of characteristics that could trigger a minor event going into major, but not that you would be allowed to have more than 1,000 square feet of structures, or not that you would have more than 100 attendees. Those were hard and fast.
Thank you.
Since we're tying the square footage to the maximum that's allowed in the rural and remote zone at 1,000, yet on the other two zone districts, you haven't made that connection, the maximum building size, tying the maximum tent size to that. Were you thinking of doing that on the other two tables, or leaving that up to our discussion?
That's a good question. We have not structured this so that we have those standards in the urban area or rural area. Those are open. All it requires is that when you get above a certain threshold of tents, then it becomes a major special event review, and we can consider it that way.
Okay.
But that could be a criteria that we would use. I mean, we've kind of struggled with what the upper limit should be. And
Somebody
that's why
might,
it's open.
we might have a traveling circus want to come up and set up the big top and a couple side tents and have, I don't know how many square feet it would be, a huge amount of square footage for a one-day circus perhaps, but looking at this rural and remote one, the community picnic at Picnic Point would not be allowed because it would have most likely have more than 100 people there. I don't think the public's going to like that. And what's the thought of other commissioners on that?
Well, I think with those kind of events, and I think Mike was looking towards going to this, is when you have a traveling number. So you have maybe 100 people at one time, but in the rural remote, you might have an athletic event where 100 people, more than 100 people pass through the rural remote for a special event. And I think with the Picnic Point issue, it's not an invitation. It's just they would never know. They could have 10 people, they could have 200 people. So I don't know how, that's the query for me, is how would you judge that? Because we're not going to do clickers with somebody standing at the bottom of the road counting heads as they go through, or coming through from whichever direction they might come through. So I don't know, that's kind of one of those community events it's a public, private, I don't know how you would define it.
You're talking about Picnic Point on Aspen Mountain?
Yeah.
You know,
on the Little Annie Road. Or is it the
Summer Road.
Midnight Mile, one of those roads?
I guess, I'm just wondering whether the nature of it being on a permitted ski area? No, it's not, okay.
It's on the backside.
It's on the backside. That name's used for a few different
Yeah.
locations where we're, yeah, okay, that's what I was trying to clarify. I guess I'm just wondering, is that something that should be reviewed and looked at as a special event venue? I mean, maybe it's time to set some parameters around it if it's more than once a year.
So they only do the community picnic once a year.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I don't want to make rules that prohibit that. It's a longstanding tradition without the impacts. It's not the same thing as erecting a 7,000 square foot tent in the backside of the rural remote. So, there's got to be some line to differentiate that type of event.
We as staff determined that the rural and remote was not appropriate for special events venues.
Okay.
That's our staff recommendation.
Plus, who owns that?
It's privately owned.
Yeah, see, so that would be, and I know they use it occasionally, I don't know how often for weddings, but they're generally small weddings with just, they pop it up for the ceremony and leave the site afterwards. I mean, that's my history of going to weddings up there. It's a beautiful place to have a small gathering of family and friends.
I guess I would be comfortable allowing some discretion for it's sort of an annual community picnic, but to have them go through a special event process, because there are impacts, be it dust control, be it safety, access, sanitation. You get over 100 people at any event. I think these are the list that we've seen earlier. They need to go through that checklist. And if they are able to satisfy the requirements of that checklist, then I think it should be up to the discretion of staff, or if they need to kick it to the BOCC to make that final decision. But I see it as a special event.
So the way you would see that is that maybe above 100 would kick it into the major event for the rural and remote.
Yes.
In rural and remote, that would become, so you don't want a hard and fast cutoff at the 100, but it would be discretionary at a major event requirement level.
Right, and if we want, we could have a maximum limit on that as well. You could say whatever, you could say 200 is max, or 250. No, you will never allow anything larger than a number, X number of people.
Yeah, I think I would go along with that too, George, to have it be 100 up to whatever number we decide, which maybe 250 would be a good number. You could do an event like that, but it would be a major event permit would be required, because we have to make sure that those different side effects of it are taken accounted for and prepared for.
Because if there's a running event or biking event, they have to go through a special permit, correct?
Yes.
So I would file that same suit.
That's a good point. I wanted to, Patty just touched on it, and it's actually note, let's see, what is it, note?
3.
Yeah, note 3, yeah, here, so I'll zoom in on this. What note 3 is, we certainly do not want to prohibit a running event, because we have some really great ones that happen in the rural and remote zone district, like the Power 4 ski mountaineering race. Now they're doing the summer event with the running and the biking. We have the Grand Traverses. I mean, that's been going on forever, and it's not our intention with this standard here to cap those or prohibit those in any way. So we added note 3 that said that, however, more than 100 people may attend an event that passes through the rural and remote zone district, such as an athletic race or similar type of event. So we do have that in there. So we're not capping those people.
Most of the standards in the chart relate to a congregation of people versus people passing through.
And overall, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I guess the one thing I wanted to raise and talk about is the 25 or less. Is that the right threshold for not having a permit required, or should it be a little higher? And I'm looking kind of specifically and thinking about this last example of item number 4 on the list there. And so if more than 3 special events are planned to occur at a site or in a building within a calendar year, then the site or building must receive special review approval as a special events venue, and there's no special event venues in this area. So if, again, that same location was having the community picnic and 3 weddings, they would be kicked over into prohibiting any of these, is how I would read it. But if 2 of those weddings had 40 people or less, then they wouldn't kick over if that was the standard. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe 25 is a little too low. I don't know if 50 isn't too high, but, 50 equals kind of 10 couples, or 20 couples with some kids, and that doesn't seem to be an outrageous number. But I'll leave it to others. Maybe it's 40, but I think that by having the threshold number a hair higher, we won't kick into number 4 as frequently for those type of very small family gatherings.
How many people can you fit inside a 1,000 square foot tent?
It's about 16 square feet, well, I'm going off building code now, so it's
That's
about
right.
16 square feet per person is what the code allows. So if you think about that, that's about a half a sheet of plywood.
But that's assuming they're all inside the tent.
I'm just
the whole
saying, I mean,
time.
we're getting inside 1,000 square feet.
16.
It's not a
Okay,
riddle
what's
or
16
anything.
divided into 1,000?
Oh my God.
Divided,
Yeah.
About 60.
John, are you doing that?
60 people.
62 and a half.
So maybe the
I want the
number,
limited 62.536 people.
I've been to a couple of parties in cabins up there on the backside of Aspen Mountain, and one of them probably had, I mean, we were packed in there. There was more than 25 people in the 1,000 square foot cabin. And it was raining outside, so people weren't going out on the deck or anything. So, and others have been smaller parties, just a couple of families getting together.
Yeah, I don't think it's, I think the intent is not to cut off the ability for people to have gatherings. Again, this was originated from an event that was way out of scale, completely out of scale. So, I would be comfortable in terms of relaxing this a little bit, because you're just going to have sort of a ballpark. No one's going to actually be counting. So if it's 25 or 30, it's going to be hard to tell. So I would go permit not required up to 50 people, and then your next column, more than 50 but less than, I'd keep 100 people there, and then have a top limit based on going through that checklist of probably, I would say, 200. And this is for rural and remote only.
Right.
So your 200 would be under major event permit is required?
Is this somehow
Kicking in at
top
the
limit?
next.
102.
Yeah.
I would support that change.
I agree.
Yeah, I would support that too. We don't want to have this be such an onerous thing that, because people do have parties at their houses, and we don't want to put a damper on that. If they can still have their party and not meet a threshold for something that's, everybody has a party at their house sometime or other, and it's an expected thing.
I just want to know more about when all these parties are happening. I'm sorry, I haven't been to that.
You want to be invited?
But
I wanna be the one with the clicker.
the other advantage of this is going to save a lot of staff time. I don't think we need to involve staff in parties that might have 28 people, so.
I think we should look at this as sort of a, working effort, that this is our first shot
Right.
at having some thresholds that we think make sense. And if we're having problems with them, this is not cast in stone.
Yeah.
Just as we're talking about having the urban and the rural go out to the caucuses and have more eyes on them and get more thoughts about it, we need to work through these things. And this is a first-year placeholder, if you will, to see how it works.
Yeah.
And I think the correlation of the 1,000 square foot tent makes sense with this 1,000 square foot building. And it would be difficult to roll that over to another district where we have 57.5, because I don't think we really want 5,000 square feet of tent. The question I have, and I'm sorry to bring this back to definition, is have we defined tent?
Isn't it defined elsewhere in the code?
I
The
don't- I
land use
just don't-
code defines it, the building code probably defines it.
Yeah.
Just a question for us to bring back, because somebody could say, oh, it's really not a tent, it's a 3-sided awning or something.
That's a very good point.
or it's, I have an awning on top of my tent. I don't know. And I know that one of the largest tents they do rent in the valley without having to go outside the valley is about 2,400 square feet, which is a big, they have like only 2 or 3 within the whole valley.
Making these numbers a little less strict goes along with the recommendation of the P&Z that they felt that the thresholds were too low, at least in some cases, and this is maybe one of the ones they were probably thinking of the number of people. Maybe it was too low of a number.
It's a good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
As I recall our work session yesterday, we discussed moving forward the rural and remote portions of this special events land use code and continuing to work with the caucuses on the rural areas and working with the municipalities on the municipal areas that are inside their urban growth boundary but outside the municipal lines. What would be the proper way to do that? I'm trying to think, do we split the 2 ordinances and just pass this now so that rural and remote will be taken care of and continue to refine the other section? And does that then need to go back to P&Z for their approval and bring back to us? But I wouldn't want to see rural and remote held up until we finish the work on the others. I think that was our discussion. And
What you just described basically was the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I think that the procedure would be to continue first reading, and I'll defer to John if he thinks I'm not correct on this, but to continue first reading, direct us to make those changes to this ordinance, continue first reading, we'll go back and craft the ordinance just as you prescribed, bring it back. We would propose we continue it to February 11th, since we already have that date scheduled as first reading, and then we still have time, if we take that, to then bring back the revised ordinance at the February 25th?
I think that's the second meeting in February.
Yeah, the second meeting in February for second reading, public hearing, and then publish, which will bring us very close to the moratorium date for effectiveness of the regulation. Now, if you're concerned that because it's 30 days after publishing that the ordinance becomes effective, so if you're concerned about the moratorium still being in effect until that time, we'll have to work out those specific dates and maybe recommend an emergency ordinance, but I'm hoping in that situation we can make that work. Do you think that's true?
Exactly, yeah. So there is potentially a gap from when the ordinance becomes effective.
Right.
And if I understand this correctly, Jeanette, an ordinance is effective 30 days after it's approved.
Final publication.
Final publication. So there might be a few-week gap in there. But there potentially is an ability to do an emergency ordinance where it would become effective immediately on second reading.
George?
The only concern I have is on the February 11th date. I think that would be still too early for some caucuses who will not have met then to address the rural. So is there a way to separate that out and we could not have to deal with that at time of second
We
reading?
think there is. The nuance in that is, our sense is that the caucuses are particularly concerned about private events on private property being captured in this, and not necessarily a public event that is happening in the rural area, which we have always regulated in our special events regulations. The thing that's new here is that we're talking about regulating private events on private property and having these thresholds which seem to be bringing it into people's backyards, and that's the concern. But if you have a significant event in the rural area, what would be an example? Boogie's Bash, which has happened on McLean Flats Road, is a significant event that is open to the public, that the county has always handled as a special event. We need to keep the regulation active on that kind of special event, but not activated for private events on private property, at least for this temporary period until the caucuses have had a chance to weigh in. And at the end of that, we may not regulate private events on private property at all, or you may have higher thresholds, or we don't know what the result will be, but I think we've come up with a way where we can keep your special events regulations in effect in the rural area for true special events, public open events, but not for private events on private property. That will be put off until the caucuses have had their time.
Well, that's just where I'm getting confused a little. It seems
Well,
that,
we're not completely there. We
Yeah,
have to
I-
work through this.
I just keep thinking, you know, perhaps we pass this as amended today to only be the rural and remote sections and the definitions and those parts, and then go forward and pass it on second reading at the next meeting. And then the special events section related currently to rural areas would not be changed and still be in effect. And the staff could, I don't know whether it would be initiating a new addition to the special events code that would then be rural and urban boundary areas, and just totally bifurcate the two. And so that if at second reading on the 25th or something, it didn't get passed, you know, or there was continuing dialogue because we're now trying to bring the rural and municipals back into the greater ordinance, we would at least know that the rural and remote section was taken care of. So I don't know if we can just bifurcate this and pass part of it now and then part of it later, or whether the second part would need to start again from P&Z as a new process. But I just at least would like to get the rural and remote done and settled.
That's what I understood you to say, and I think that is doable. And what we would do is basically put aside the tables that relate to the urban area and the rural area for now.
Mhm.
We would craft the ordinance to only apply to the rural and remote area, and then I have a question for you about the special event venues to apply countywide, because that is, I think, the question.
It seems pretty solid already.
That is one alternative. The other alternative is to play with the different thresholds now, have a higher threshold, and to pass everything. But I think, I definitely understand what your recommendation is, and we could do that and continue first reading, loosening up the ordinance, if you will, or making the ordinance more lenient, if you will, and thereby not having to republish for first reading.
Well, that's why, again, I'm kind of wondering why not pass this as amended today as opposed to continuing it. You use the language continue again. And so I'm saying, why not pass this as amended today to only deal with the rural and remote and the new language definitions and the special events venue language, and get that passed hopefully at the second reading, and then take up the other sections either as a new ordinance or as amendments to that. I just, you know, maybe John can help us on process, but you keep talking about continuing to the next reading, and I don't know why.
We just feel like we need some cleanup if you do that, because there are certain sections that relate to the whole. It will just, the red line or the underlined version will look quite different, and it will need some cleanup. But that doesn't mean we can't
Have that for second
your
reading.
recommendation unless John is uncomfortable with that.
Sounds like you ought to bring it back for a continued first reading.
Okay, I'll go with the attorney's advice, but
Now, can I throw in the M
Yeah.
word? The moratorium, since I wasn't part of the original passing of the moratorium, I'm not sure of the dates, but if we have to continue anything that has to go back out to public notice, for example, or back to P&Z, that's going to lengthen our time frame?
It doesn't have to go back to P&Z if you're doing what we just heard.
Okay,
But we will check to ensure that we're not going to have a gap with the moratorium.
but if we were, this is a question for Mr. Ely, if we were, can we then take out the rural remote from the moratorium because it would be passed and continue a moratorium onto the rural suburban?
Depends on how you structure the moratorium, but to continue it for a limited amount of time to complete the work and crafting a regulation, yes, you can generally do that without too much.
I don't want to lengthen the moratorium unless absolutely necessary, but, one of the things, if you don't, you might have some things that rush in that you really aren't anticipating or wanting, and I don't want that to happen.
And just to clarify too, the moratorium is specific to the rural and remote zone district.
Only.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's what I
So
needed to know,
that's-
since I wasn't part of the original
Yeah.
The
moratorium.
question becomes this ordinance in effect repeals all of your
You're gonna have that
existing
gap.
special events regulations. If you only adopt it in the rural and remote zone, now you've created this,
We won't.
That's
This is the coordination that we have to come up with.
Okay,
because
well,
we're
I'll let it go. We
10%
need to
into
continue.
that.
Yeah.
That's-
See, Alan, that's
The
what I,
direction was not
I
to.
know,
Okay.
I think-
making clear the problem.
that's what I didn't understand with what Alan was saying. I couldn't figure out, because I didn't realize the moratorium was only specific. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that what we could do is go ahead and continue, and if we have to extend the moratorium, we will extend the moratorium when
I
the
don't think
time
that's-
comes, in order, so we don't have a window of opportunity for wedding planners to plan big things or something.
In April on the backside of
I would still like to go over the tables 1 and 2 while we're here, and we have members of the public here who are interested in these. So. And then also probably talk about the special venue stuff too.
Can we, Steve, can we look at the special venues first and hopefully get that resolved? Because we can look at these other tables, but I think our direction is to send this back to the caucuses and let them really work on it. So I wouldn't want to spend an inordinate amount of time on looking at these other tables at this point.
Because it could come back totally different.
I agree with that. Okay, the special events venue discussion, what page would that start?
On the roller numbers, that would be page 28. And I pulled up on the overhead too, Rachel. It's a lot of words, a lot of verbiage here.
What numbers is he talking about?
The very
those ones
bottom,
we
the
stamped.
000,
Oh,
I think there might be a more technical.
It looks like 23 actually,
but
the inked in.
come through.
Print.
There you go.
But as we're talking about a special event venue, is a proposal here that we would create a use that would be a special review use in the land use code. We talked about it being a Board of County Commissioners one-step review, notice in the paper, posting of the property, mailings out to the neighbors. And then in Chapter 4, we would have the standards in which someone would have to represent to us how this venue would operate. Number of attendees, how many events you could see happening on the property per calendar year, whether employees would be hired for it, things of that nature. And to think about a special event venue, the ones that we all maybe know is the old Elk Mountain Lodge. That was the venue up Castle Creek that's now a single-family residence, and that was a property that had basically a venue status on it. And they'd have parties there, and they were approved for that use. This would be similar to this. Someone would come to staff and say, I'd like to designate this residence as a venue property, and we would do a pre-application conference summary sheet with them. We'd outline these code sections, and they would apply to us. And then there'd be a public hearing before the County Commissioners.
So when you use the example of Elk Mountain Lodge, when that was set up as a venue for commercial, this is maybe a question for the assessor's office, but how was it classified for tax purposes? Was it residential? Was it commercial? In Woody Creek example, was it agriculture? Do you remember how Elk Mountain was?
I don't know how the assessor actually classified that, but my assumption is that they would have classified that as a commercial use. We did ask Larry Fight yesterday after our work session how they classify other venues that we know about that are actually in a residential and agricultural zone, and the response was that if there's an occasional party at a property that's within a different designation, they don't typically tax it as a commercial venue. It would be as though someone was renting their home a couple times a year type of thing. But I think the question for us is, when is it a couple times a year versus many times a year, and how does that kick in to a different type of classification? And what I like about the venue recommendation is that it gives us that bright line. If something is classified as a venue, then the assessor has the ability to say, this isn't just a residential property. This property, such as the older, Elk Mountain Lodge property, that had an approval to have 54 events a year. That's what was worked out through the special events process. That's clearly an event property that probably was taxed as commercial. My assumption.
Right, thanks, but in this new section, we don't really specify number of events.
That would come to you.
More
as
than 3 is a special events venue. More than 3 per year, by definition, is a special events venue.
And then that may kick the status from a residential to a commercial use for tax purposes.
Right. What would happen is, if someone intended to have more than 3 events at their property, that kicks in the requirement of coming in for a special events venue status. That would be reviewed much like our special review today, with all the different standards. The Board of County Commissioners would say, well, we see this property is in Old Snowmass. I'm just looking at you, see, this property is in Old Snowmass. The caucus would weigh in, individuals would weigh in, the board would see all of that review and come up with, oh, well, we think 54 events a year is appropriate, as an example. And then that would kick it into more of the event status that would trigger the assessor to look at it as a different type of property.
Rachel?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it gets to us for review and they're allowed 5 events a year, that may or may not change the tax status. And similar to any other number of publications, they always say, check with your tax advisor. We're not giving tax information. We're not requiring anyone to change their tax status. And I don't think the code would dictate tax law. It really would be up to interpretation of others,
The land use code will not, but what we'll do, unfortunately, Larry was great. He answered, he was on vacation, and he even answered. So hopefully by your continued next reading, we will have a little more information and maybe even have one of the assessors present for you to ask those questions.
What's at the Flying Dog Ranch on Prince Creek Road, what's their
Special review
status?
approval.
The Red Barn?
The Red Barn special review approval. And I don't know that one as well, how many events they're allowed, but it was the same process, and I don't know how they're taxed.
And I think it is a certain number of events a year, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
kind of how I
There were
recall.
limits on the size of the events and the number of them and the times.
In transportation and catering and how many vehicles can be parked, and it's much like Elk Mountain, because I was involved in both of those. Very carefully done and very site-specific.
And never any complaints.
Now, Rich?
Yeah, so back on this section, the one thing I didn't necessarily notice, and maybe again it's referenced somewhere else, but how long is the permit good for?
That's in the table. I think it's a 1 year.
And then it's a reapplication?
Not exactly. That was a lapsing thing we put in there, yeah. So the way a special review, I know John
That's
looks
a
don't
great
like-
look, John.
Yeah. The way a special review would work is that unless the board dictated a cap on how long this could operate for, a special review use can operate indefinitely then, as long as it's within the parameters of their permit. But we have not written in a length of time that permit would be good for.
Or each one can be case by case. We typically today, the way we work special reviews is that they have to have an annual review to ensure that they are compliant with the conditions of approval. Now, the board could say the board wants a review annually.
I just would like there to be some review. I mean, I think there should be something set up so that there's kind of a closeout report at the end of the year, and they could say, well, we got permitted for 8, but we really only had 4, and these were the attendance numbers, and I think you need to work on a criteria of what needs to be in that report, but that way you guys can document if you've had neighbor complaints against anything, and what party was that associated with, or what date. But I think that, in terms of, I'm not saying that we need to put someone all the way through the process again each year, but I also wouldn't want to make sure that we have an ability to call it up for review or modification of conditions or things like that if there tend to be long-term issues.
So an annual reporting requirement that could become an annual review, but not necessarily.
Yeah, that's kind of how I would see it, but just
Yeah.
bring it up.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it could get, as this is an evolving kind of, it's a work in progress, we could find after so many years that maybe we wanted to then say after 5 years, you go to, if there's been no issues, no complaints. We've done that in the past. If you've been a good, abided by the code, then you get a little grace period. So I think we can evolve into first year for 5 years and then see what
Yeah,
happens.
I don't want to create uncertainty for the venue operators, I don't want that. But there needs to be an ability to pull a permit if someone,
Right, monitor.
agreed to 300 and they constantly have 600 people, I mean, there's that sort of thing. We need to make sure we have an ability, and I think we do through, recorded violations of your permit standards.
Does that lie within the permit itself? So if you violate blatantly the first 2 events you have, that permit is pulled?
Could revoke it, yes.
Okay, want to make sure that that's there just so that they know they don't get a year of free reign and then.
Now, there's a situation in the Woody Creek caucus area where there's different properties that have been doing corporate retreat kind of things and running snowmobile tours up the county road from former Floyd Watkins property and using residential and agricultural buildings for special venue type events. What would be the procedure for those properties where they're I don't know if they're allowed to use it that way right now, but they are using it that way, and that's something that
They would be in
we need to
violation
deal
if this
with.
passes. They would definitely be in violation and need to come through a review to say whether or not you thought that was an appropriate location for a venue. Now, there are venues, I'll just use an example of the Diamond J up the Frying Pan. That has been a resort property for eons, and I don't think we have any desire to draw those people into the need for a permit at this point. But what we would do is we would review those based on their status. That has a status as a resort
Cabin. Yeah,
Cabin
they have a resort cabin, Board of County
approval.
Commissioner approval.
And along with that, we think that fits into a category of its own that doesn't need this type because it's been ongoing. Whereas the example you just gave, that just changed when ownership changed, and it wasn't a situation that was ever reviewed under any type of approval process. So I think those are the kinds of things we would have to get a little more vigilant about and ask them to come in for a review. But it brings up another question that the board has on our list of about 10 things you asked us to think about to bring back for you today. And one of those was, if you wanted to go caucus by caucus area, that particular property, say for example, is in the Woody Creek caucus area. And I don't know if Woody Creek would ask for this or not, but they may say, we don't want to be a venue property caucus. We would like no venues to be allowed. I'm just using that as an example. Or they may say, we're happy that we can review those and we're fine with that. We don't know at this point.
But what we have in front of us, this is very broad. So this doesn't prohibit a neighborhood or a caucus from adding to this or subtracting from this or updating their master plans.
Well, what this would be, if you adopted, say, this today, say the Merlin Road and then the venue, my assumption is that you are today saying that the venue portion of this would apply countywide, not just, it would be countywide. And then that's one alternative. Another alternative might be that you apply it to specific
But
locations.
I guess I'm asking, we could apply this countywide, but as caucuses are updating their master plans,
They could come in and request.
they can come in and request some changes and go through P and Z.
They could.
Okay, so, yeah, so.
They could come in and say we are just as the countywide application of growth management is you get exemption for 5,750
Right.
square feet, whereas various caucuses have said, we only want this or we want that.
Right,
And
yeah.
you have granted that.
Yeah, okay.
Rachel?
Yeah, I personally would rather see a bit of a countywide code related to special event venues, and then have that discretion of the hearings and the neighborhood input to say yes or no, or how many, as opposed to blanketly saying none here, none here, none here. You know, caucus areas are great advisory groups, and I think there's a lot of respect for that in the board, but there's always balance that needs to happen within the people who are within this industry, in event planners and caterers and things like that. So I personally wouldn't want to start saying this applies here and it doesn't apply here, and then focus all the events in one area. You know, it kind of would start to say, well, let's ban all special events, you know, because otherwise one poor group's going to end up with all 500, and, you know, so I just, you know, I think that's why the hearing process and making sure the event is suitable or not suitable, and how many they can have a year or not have a year. So that's just my opinion on that, and we'll discuss it further later. The issue that is being raised, and I think it's separate from this, and we need to take a look at it. Yes, it will fall under special event venues, but as we're starting to see really large homes turned into corporate retreats, that brings up a different issue of what is appropriate in a residential neighborhood. And our corporate retreats, and I mean, it might as well be a youth hostel. You know, it's just, is that what you expect when you buy property in a residential neighborhood? And neighbors, you know, depend on the zoning when they buy, of what it allows and what it doesn't allow. And when someone says it's residential, it's residential. So the real way you end up looking at things like that are habitation laws about how many non-related individuals can live in a home, you know, or use it, or when does something become a de facto hotel. And those are far out concepts, and they're not far out. I mean, they're difficult to apply. And you usually have a fairly high threshold, but you need to have a point where people can say, no, 20 people can't live in 800 square feet, you know, just because it makes it more affordable. There's those sort of standards all across the country. And I think that at some point, when a corporate retreat has been purchased to be able to bring in different groups of 25 people every 2 weeks, it's become a hotel. It's become something different, and it's not a residential use. And so, again, I'd like to look at that separate from this, but that is something that is really beginning to occur.
Mike?
I'd like to make a couple points, Steve, just to clarify the special events venue that I think will help the board in their deliberations. One is that a special event venue is a special review use. And if you remember in the land use code, when you get a special review use application, there's that broad list of criteria in Chapter 2 that talks about neighborhood compatibility, shall not have off-site impacts, things that are broad in nature, but one of those is shall consider the applicable master plan. And that's a really powerful tool for planning staff to use when reviewing a special review use. That way we get to consider which caucus master plan is applicable and how it will be used. That's a really important point, I think, when we're talking about this venue property. The second is that in Chapter 4 permitted uses table, we've identified which zone districts can have a special event venue in them. And what we talked about in the rural remote, we did not allow, as it's currently drafted, don't have the rural remote zone district to have the ability to have a venue property. And what we've done is we've limited it to a few zone districts, and I'll just call them out here. The RS 20 and 30, the AR 10, the B1, B2, and then the VC zone district, which is up in Redstone. The other zone districts in our urban growth boundary, R15, R30, R15A, those zone districts, as it's currently drafted, would be a prohibited use in those zone districts. So if you think about how, you know, our larger tracts of land out in the rural area of the county, we've tried to limit this venue property to those larger properties, whereas in the urban areas where you have sometimes 15,000 square feet of lot size or 10,000 square feet of lot size, we don't those zone districts don't have the ability for this. So I just want to make that point too. The third point I just want to clarify too, and I don't want to talk too much, but the board, with a special event venue property application, you may receive an application for a structure that is not a residence. And what staff was thinking was you may receive an application for a structure that maybe got exempt square footage in a barn or an agricultural building. And we wanted to have the board to have a review authority or a leverage on that review when it comes in. So we included this B here, and I'll just read it. The board shall consider any prior approvals that were granted to the structure or site to be used as a venue, including whether any limitations or conditions were placed on such prior approvals and whether designation of the site or structure as a special events venue would be consistent or inconsistent with the representations made and the conditions imposed on those prior approvals. That would give you the ability to look at past BOCC reviews or staff reviews or decisions to make a determination if, for example, a barn or an agricultural building should actually be a venue.
You may have sized a barn and said, you know, we can accept that size of structure in your subdivision because it's a barn and it has an agricultural purpose. And now suddenly it's a big structure that's being used for commercial activities, and you never would have allowed it to be 20,000 square feet or whatever, had you known it was going to be that. So we wanted to give you that ability. I remember that coming up during the work session all the way back in September. One of you guys suggested that. That's where that standard came from.
But we have, with our new code that we passed with our ag buildings, we have that specifically, that it has to be used for ag. So we're talking about past, and trying to bring them up to code.
Yeah, but even if someone's using it for ag, it doesn't mean they couldn't apply for this, because they might say that helps support my ag operations to have a little income. So I think it's a very good provision for us to bear in mind.
The big barn at McCabe Ranch has been there forever.
Yeah.
And if it were to become a venue, really big venue property there.
Right.
And it's mostly used for calving.
Yeah.
That's
Currently.
That's a different kind of event.
Very special.
Special event.
There are representatives here from several of the different caucuses in the county, including the Woody Creek and the Frying Pan and the Snowmass Capital Creeks, and perhaps more, I don't know. And I was wondering if any representatives from the caucus areas would like to ask any questions or make a short statement at this time about where you are. Martha?
Hi, I'm Martha Ferguson. I'm from the Snowmass Capital Creek Caucus. What I wanted to say, I came because I've had some residents come to me with concerns exactly as Alan Richmond depicted. They're worried about having a nice summer party or a wedding and suddenly having to go through some kind of process and pay fees, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll be interested to see how it pans out in the end with, and we're in, I would assume, the rural region. So how that pans out, and I think maybe what I'll do is we'll come back with some written recommendations from the caucus as far as thresholds. I also did want to have a definition of what is a tent, because some people, first of all, if the thresholds go a little bit higher than what is called out, people have a tent or something just in case of rain. But some people might put up like an awning. Is that considered a tent? Does that have to have a permit? So I'd really love to know that, to let everyone in our area know. Also, I had a thought about, like, if some people fall into this permit not required section with everything except for tents, because if you have, say you have a wedding and you have 150 people who come. 100 of those people might be your relatives, 50 friends. It's easy to get up to 150. But you want to provide something in case it rains in the middle of the summer. What if, is there any way that you could change that so that if you fell into the category of no permit required except for tents, that someone could just apply for a tent permit and not have to go through the whole minor special event process. It could really streamline and not bog up the administrative part of all these additional permits coming through needing review. So I was just
Good
thinking
thought.
that might be something to address.
A just-in-case tent.
Do you want us to respond? That's the intent with these, if the intent. That's the direction we're going. And in fact, today, people don't really even realize, but a 400 square foot tent requires a permit.
Yeah.
Beyond for the building portion of things. And at that point, we'd be able to review and look at all the other aspects of these criteria and say, well, you really don't need one.
Okay, yeah, because I'm glad to hear there's some flexibility and attempt to look at each situation in town.
Yeah, we've absolutely given the staff the ability to classify the events as needing or not needing a permit, needing a minor versus a major. And so they can look at it and say, you know, just get your tent permit and call it a day.
Okay, any other caucus representatives wish to speak at this time? You'll have ample opportunity at when we have the second hearing too. There will be the public hearing then, and you can all make a statement. Marilyn?
Hi, I'm Marilyn Lee from the Frying Pan Caucus, and generally the members we've talked with so far are against any sort of regulation. We don't feel it's necessary in Frying Pan because, you know, we haven't had instances of big parties or big events that were not covered by some other regulation. We feel that these thresholds are too low, which I guess you're addressing, such as the rural and remote one of only 25 people. That seems to us as being the same as in wilderness areas. Which I would think would be a little bit different in general forest areas, or regardless, we felt it would be too low. And on the question of the tents in a rural and remote area, only 400 square feet, that's like 4 little easy ups, isn't it? And that seems really small when you're out there in an area where there is not a structure, and there's likely to be rain, so we would wonder if maybe we should increase the size of the tent that would be allowed. And then there hasn't been any discussion about fees. At the P&Z meeting, I believe you all said it would be $600 to $1,200. We feel that is pretty high. And I assume that you would have to pay that fee just to have it reviewed, regardless of whether or not you have a permit. And so for some little get-togethers, that would be very expensive to us. So.
Okay. Thank you, Marilyn.
Would you like me to respond to the fee part?
If
Because
you
you
could.
did ask us to come back with that today. And Marilyn is correct in that our fee structure today would require between $300 and $600, something like that, for a minor event, and upwards of like $1,500 for the major event in the fee structure today. But the board wanted to discuss that based on the fact that we've never had regulations on some of these areas before, and you may want to direct us to have different fees based on that.
We express concerns as well, especially with the small event permits, and I think that's something we'll have to take a little bit of a look at and maybe get a track record with, even for the first year or two. I mean, I would be interested myself, just speaking for myself, in setting them what we might consider really low, but seeing what the subsidy then required on staff time is from the county. We generally have a development plays its own way, philosophy for fees, but there's certainly times when that is a little bit flexible. And so as we're first instituting something like this, that's how I would like to approach it, and then kind of track where it goes, and you know, do you end up not being able to pay for 50 hours of staff time because we set our fees so low, and if so, we have to make that up in your budget from the general fund or something else. But I think easing this in, as opposed to having really huge barriers, is going to be the important component to community support for it and protecting neighbors.
So then, do we need to discuss fees right now for rural and remote for minor events versus major events as part of this ordinance?
If you'd like to. Our fee ordinance is coming back soon.
But is that separate from this discussion? That's, I'm fine with
I was
Rachel's.
gonna say, I'd rather make it a separate discussion so we can look at the relativity and
Okay.
staff can give us a full report on the time they expect to expend and things like that.
Steve, I have one more question that's kind of out of the line. We're talking staff time. Has there been any discussion as to the need for a staff person that just does special events or seasonal special events? Did that been, I see that it might have been talked about?
Well, we actually used to have a position
I know we-
dedicated to that. I think during the recession, there was a lot of realignment in terms of staff responsibilities and such. Obviously, I think if the board adopts a policy or procedure that creates a great deal of extra workload, we'll need to revisit that, just like we do when building inspections go up or down. We really look at making sure we have an adequate staffing level for the right level of service. And so I think that's an open discussion still. I think where we've been at, Mike has been plugging away and our existing staff, but it has been a discussion back and forth. If we're going to get more involved, or if there's going to be a more rigorous process with reviewing and monitoring special events, we probably need to look at a staff person.
I just think that's important because we don't want to delay the process for people either by not having staff available to review applications.
Yeah, and we're
Okay.
there.
All right, just want to make sure that that was part of the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. And Nancy McKenzie has her hand up. Nancy?
Hi. I appreciate that you're going to pull out the rural areas and the higher density areas and address it later because our caucuses just meet once a month. And we are addressing this in our rewriting of the master plan. And we're pretty close to getting ours rewritten. But we have a meeting tomorrow.
Thanks.
And so we'll start discussing it and having people review the chapters of our new master plan. But we hope that you will, look at individual areas too, like ours, and the impacts it could have. And I think you addressed that issue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Block. I appreciate what you're doing with the sort of caucus-specific determinations, and I think that's really good. Good job.
Okay. Thank you. Okay,
So-
what's the,
How do you make a motion?
I was gonna say, that's a little complicated one.
Rachel's our master motion.
Well, I was just actually going to ask Cindy for a suggested motion on this because you're the one who understands this process of leaving some parts behind and moving some parts forward.
The board simply continues first reading. What will come back is a different ordinance for adoption.
Okay. I would move to continue the ordinance amending Title 8 of the Pickens County Code, specifically the 2006 Land Use Code for Land Use Code text amendments, and to see the changes that have been discussed at the board brought back at the continued first reading.
What date?
February 11th.
February 11th.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to continue to February 11th. Any further discussion?
I just want to compliment staff and Alan. This was a tremendous amount of new work, different work, and I think we're starting to address what precipitated this whole discussion in terms of closing a loophole, specifically for starting with rural remote, but decided looking at it as a county-wide. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
It's been a good process, thank you.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, staff, and thank you, Alan. Thank you, caucus members, for coming today.
We take a short break.
Yes, let's take a,
These are consent action items set for public hearing later, Steve, just to
Yeah.
make it known, so it's not public.
okay, let's take a 5-minute break and. All right, welcome back. We're at the Pickens County Commissioners' regular meeting on Wednesday, January 28th. The next item on our agenda is consent action resolution establishing the formula for the distribution of the municipal share of county sales tax revenue for the year 2015. And we have Susan Atwood.
It's such a mouthful to say that. Does anybody have any questions on this?
Well, maybe for the public, you could give an explanation.
Yeah, just give a real brief explanation to, I think we pretty much understand it.
Okay, well, what happens is Pickens County, or the state, collects for Pickens County 3.6% sales tax. Of that, 0.10% goes to Healthy Rivers and Stream. The 0.5% is for transportation. 1% is for, it's split between Raft of the City and Snowmass. The city's pays Raft its contribution, I believe, for the city service, out of the 1%. The 2% is then split between Basalt, Snowmass, Pitkin County, and the city of Aspen, of which Pitkin County's share always remains 43%. But the shares between Basalt, Snowmass, and Aspen are divided up based on the 1% of sales tax that they collect during the prior year. So this year, and there's not a whole lot of movement between them, but this year the city of Aspen will get, of that 57% remaining, 75%, town of Snowmass gets 19%, and the town of Basalt gets 4%.
What this is just divvying up of these taxes that are collected by the state.
Right.
Rachel?
Well, I was going to say, thanks for the explanation. And these taxes are voter-approved taxes for given specific purposes. And there was a resolution, and I think ballot question passed in '78 that determined the split between Snowmass, Basalt, and Pickens County on that other tax. So this is just an annual acknowledgement of who collected what and what the new distribution formula will be.
Right.
Correct.
Very good.
So the part that's the Basalt allocation comes from sales tax that was generated within the Pitkin County portion of Basalt, is that correct?
Correct.
And none of the Eagle County portion.
Correct.
So it's a small percentage, just 4% of the sales tax generated in the county comes from the Pitkin County side of the
Well, no, it's not 4% of the sales tax. It's, what we do is we break it down to compare a percent by a percent by a percent, and then take the proportion of that. And that's where it comes that the city of Aspen obviously collects the greatest amount of sales tax, and Basalt's share of that is only 4%. So it doesn't really equate to how much tax that they get. It's to what share of the tax that we collect is theirs.
Okay.
Yes, that does make
Rachel?
sense.
Would you accept a motion?
Yes.
I move to approve the resolution establishing the formula for distribution of the municipal share of county sales tax revenue for the year 2015 as required by Resolution 78-121.
Second?
And just for this is a first reading set for public?
This is the
right?
first reading set for public hearing on February 11th and the second. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We almost matched with our blues today. We almost matched with our blues.
I know, I was thinking that when I was sitting back there.
Next, we have an ordinance authorizing an amendment to sections of the Pitkin County Code regulating the licensing of retail and medical marijuana establishments in caucus areas. And John Ely is going to cover that for us.
All right, Steve and the rest of the commission. The ordinance that is in front of the board for consideration is a first reading that would allow for the amendment of the county's retail marijuana as well as medical marijuana regulations. Both amendments for both regulations are contained within the same ordinance for consideration. Both amendments pertain to the same the subject matter, and that is the prohibitions that were imposed in certain caucus areas of the county prohibiting any marijuana licensing from occurring. The prohibitions were first enacted February 12 of last year when the county adopted retail marijuana licensing regulations. They were carried forward, but not in the same manner, consistent with caucus regulation or caucus recommendations, which were different for medical and retail at the time. In July of last year, when the medical marijuana regulations were amended. At the time, the board wanted to reconsider both of these sets of prohibitions to determine whether or not the board wanted to continue following the recommendations of the various caucus areas, or whether the board wanted to basically get away from caucus-wide prohibitions and simply entertain applications on a case-by-case or property-by-property basis. What is proposed is a continuation of the caucus recommendations. If the board wants to continue and not to have these prohibitions, then quite frankly we don't need to take any action. The county's prohibition based upon the earlier caucus recommendations are set to expire automatically. So that would be the, I guess I would offer as the first point of discussion for the board. If the county wants to continue with the prohibitions as recommended by the various caucuses, the regulations that would allow that are contained as an exhibit to the offered ordinance. We've received responses from all of the caucuses that we expected to see responses from that have previously weighed in on whether or not to allow marijuana licensing. The Franklin Caucus, the Woody Creek Caucus, and Snowmass Capital Caucus have all reiterated their desire to have a complete prohibition of any marijuana licenses whatsoever. The Crystal River has modified their previous recommendation. The Woody Creek has maintained their recommendation for a complete prohibition, although they indicate they may only want to see that happen for 1 year in duration while they continue to work and then see regulations adopted within the county code that mirror their master plan. So Emma Caucus has not been able to review in an assembled situation, although their previous recommendation has been carried forward here because, quite frankly, I have not observed any indication that Emma would want to change its previous recommendation. If they do in fact want to make a change, we can always amend the regulations to affect that recommendation if that's the desire of the board. So what we see is a prohibition of all licenses for the frying pan, a prohibition of all licenses in Woody Creek. Now, in regards to Woody Creek, we haven't left that for 1 year. We've just simply put that prohibition in place. The prohibition in Snowcap is a little bit different than the recommendation that was offered. When the entire caucus got together, they were able to vote a recommendation that their previous recommendations be maintained. And when the governing board, so to speak, of the Snowcap caucus got together, they took a vote that recommended a prohibition of all licenses. I've incorporated what the governing board has recommended, a prohibition of all licenses, just because I think when the caucus as a whole got together, there might have been some confusion. Earlier, the Snowcap caucus recommended that there be no licenses for retail marijuana and no cultivation licenses for medical marijuana. And to carry that forward would be somewhat inconsistent, because I think at the time that recommendation was made, the folks in Snowcap didn't realize that their zoning would allow other medical marijuana licenses to be issued. I think the assumption was they would only be available for cultivation type licenses. So I've communicated with the caucus's former chair, at least, when these recommendations were formulated, to let her know that this would be the recommendation that was offered for the BOCC, and that if anybody had any contrary opinions, that they should let us know. The Crystal River Caucus has changed their previous recommendation. Previously, they had recommended that there would be a restriction on activities within the caucus area that was broader in scope than simply what's being offered at this point in time. The Crystal River Caucus essentially wants to prohibit any retail operations within the village of Redstone. So that prohibition has been included within this offered ordinance. The rest of the Crystal River Caucus area does not have any prohibitions associated with it, so that what would happen in the event that someone sought a license of any type elsewhere in the caucus area than Redstone is that that application would be referred to the caucus, and then it would be evaluated by the board with a recommendation from the caucus, depending on what type of license it might be, or the location and intensity, and the whole variety of other issues associated with issuances of licenses. The various caucus recommendations are attached to the agenda item summary. The only other thing that I would point out is that the previous regulations had a sunset on the prohibitions of 1 year to give the board a chance to revise and reconsider the acceptance of the caucus recommendations, or going a different direction, or any other alternative. These prohibitions are drafted into an amended regulation that does not sunset. So these prohibitions will stay in place until we are either requested by someone to relax them, to amend them, or we take it upon ourselves to do so. And I think that's the more appropriate way to go, simply because to revisit it continually just puts an additional burden on the caucus bodies to keep having the same discussion. So unless something changes from the caucuses themselves, or the board wants to do something in a different direction, I would recommend the prohibitions just stay as offered.
Patty?
John, I have a question going back to Redstone. In the deleted red, is there an existing license, or did they just say that just in case there was?
There is an existing cultivation license for both medical and retail marijuana in the Crystal River Valley.
Then these licenses will now be taken away?
No, they would be allowed to
Okay,
continue, and the prohibition against any cultivation would go away. Cultivation, by virtue of zoning, would not be happening within
Right.
Redstone, and so the activities that could happen in Redstone would be prohibited.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we're not taking away a license from somebody who already had an existing retail
Or medical.
or medical.
That's correct.
Okay.
George?
So John, the way this ordinance is written, this ordinance, if we approve this ordinance, it's supporting the caucus recommendations.
That's correct. With the nuances that I
With
mentioned.
the nuances, yeah. So I would support this, and I think what we're going to see as all the caucuses are in the process of updating their master plans, that I suspect we'll see language in those master plans specifically addressing marijuana licensing in different caucus areas. And of course, that goes before the P&Z to approve the entire master plan. So this allows time for the caucuses to continue their master planning update efforts.
Rachel?
So I think you said that these would continue in perpetuity unless there's a change brought to us or the board brings up a change. I am not as comfortable with that. And I understand what you're saying about not wanting an annual review, but I think that it would be appropriate that it be called up, I'd say in 3 years, that we would look at, should there be changes or not changes, have attitudes changed, has federal law changed, has state law changed, you know, at least as kind of like a 3-year required check-in. It would probably be future board members, but you know, I think that would be reasonable as a requirement, that, you know, the board shall review these codes every 3 years, or that they expire at 3 years unless they're readopted, something like that. You can give me the pros and cons of that.
Well, the pros and cons, I think the board's already aware. The question would be, how would you craft something like that into the ordinance? If you draft or accept these prohibitions for a limited duration, then they simply expire at the end of that duration. Like these will expire without any action come February, middle of February. So the other way to go is to simply write into the ordinance, the county shall reevaluate within some period of time. That's a little bit more complicated simply because if an action doesn't happen, you know, we require of ourselves to do this thing. If we don't do it for some reason, then what? It falls off a particular, or it doesn't, you know, does that throw some sort of a shadow over the regulation as a whole or something like that? So I guess my recommendation would be to go in the former direction, where that if you want to revisit these, you set up a sunset for the prohibitions of 3 years or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's your intent.
Yeah, I just throw that out to the board to consider what way they'd like to go on that. And
Well, you know, I agree, but I understand John's thing, because if we don't want it to negate anything if for some reason it's forgotten to be brought back. So I think on the behalf of the board, we just have to remember to ask you in 3 years to bring it back to us for review. Because I think, you know, it's such an evolving, growing issue that I think changes may well be necessary, or may not be, but I think it's wise of us to review it in a period of time, and it would be wise of us then to bring it back to staff on our own merit.
Yeah, I guess I don't see the need. I think even though it's 3 years, it's out quite a ways, it's really hard to get caucuses to respond and meet in a timely fashion to really address this issue in a timely fashion. Caucuses can request a change whenever they want, and as I said, I suspect that we're going to see language in each of these caucus master plans addressing this specifically, and it's probably going to become academic after that if it gets accepted by the P&Z.
Okay.
You know, the chief purpose for the sunset of the earlier prohibition was simply to allow the board to discuss the advisability of having, you know, caucus by caucus regulations, or to have a blanket regulation for the entirety of the county. If the board is comfortable in regards to marijuana to accepting the recommendations of the caucus, then it really makes more sense to let the caucus make that recommendation on their own timeline, whatever that might be. If we want to revisit the idea of a county-wide regulation versus caucus by caucus regulation, then it would make sense to come back in some interval, whether it's 3 years or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just really want to raise the issue because we've had to review and modify these fairly consistently since the legalization occurred in Colorado, and I was just wondering if we really felt like we had it all right now, or whether, you know, whether we should have an automatic review. But I think both your logic and George's, that there will be plenty of opportunities or ways in which this will be brought up or memorialized. So I'll just let that stand.
I just want to make it clear, too, just so that the public knows that at any time, any member of the public wouldn't have to be a caucus. Couldn't they bring it back and ask us to review it? I mean, is it just up to a caucus?
Any individual or member of the public or association or group or anything can approach the board and request action.
So in a year, or 6 years, or 5 years, or 3 years, and there were some significant changes and a member of the public brought it back, we could then open up the discussion. Just want to make it clear to the public that the discussion could always be opened at any time.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. My personal view, I like the direction the Crystal River Caucus is taking, quite frankly, which I think is where we will be across the whole county eventually at some point in the future, where site-specific considerations will be taken into account, neighborhood considerations. Anybody can make an application like a land use application, and the board could weigh the merits of that on an individual basis. And I think eventually it will get to that. Right now, the state is still changing laws regarding marijuana rules. The federal situation will not be clear probably for a number of years, although now there are 4 states that have legalized recreational marijuana. And I think more than half the states have legalized medical marijuana. So I think it's just a matter of time before the whole country eventually will have legalize marijuana. And whether it's in our lifetimes, I don't know. I think it's an evolving thing. It will take some time. I would prefer to do something like Rachel proposed, where we would actually have a sunset date on it and take a look at it. But I'd be comfortable with going with the idea of just having it be, you know, an indefinite period, and then it can be brought up to review again at some time in the future. And I think we'll kind of have a sense, the public will have a sense, and the board at that time will probably have a sense of what the consensus of the community is, and what, you know, of the whole state and the whole country, and kind of know when it's time, maybe time to review our own regulations.
Accept the motion?
Yes.
So I would make a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing the amendment to section 6.48.070 C16 and 6.49.070 C15 and 16 of the Pickens County Code regulating the licensing of retail and medical marijuana establishments in caucus areas.
Second?
Okay, any further discussion?
I'd just like to thank staff again for going out to all the caucuses and doing the background work to bring it to us pretty well wrapped up with a bow on it.
Just a letter.
Good job, John.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. And the final public hearing on this will also be February 11th, but you get a sense of the direction.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Next item is a resolution approving a memorandum of understanding with the Colorado State Health Department for PM10 monitoring. Kurt Dahl from Environmental Health is here.
Good afternoon. What I have before the board is a memorandum of understanding with the State Health Department, Air Pollution Control Division, for my department, the Environmental Health Department, to take over the operation of the PM10 monitors that are now on the Yellow Brick building. They were previously on the library, and when the library was re-roofed last August, they were moved along with the city's air quality monitors to the Yellow Brick building, and then they have not been operated since. Just a little background. In 1988, the Aspen area was listed in non-attainment for PM10 with the National Ambient Air Quality Regulations. At that point in time, the City of Aspen and Pickens County both took several steps to reduce PM10. PM10 is particulate matter. It's 10 microns to 2.5 micrometers in size. To give you an idea of that size, the average human hair is about 70 micrometers. So we're talking particulates that are about 7 times smaller than a human hair. They create health concerns with heart and lungs, and so they're a piece that we monitor, and that's why we have that standard set. In 2003, we came back into attainment. Actually, we had been previously in attainment, but we were designated in 2003 as an attainment/maintenance site. That maintenance piece means that we had to continue to monitor PM10 particulates and report back to the EPA to ensure that we're not in violation or that we need to change some of the pieces that we've put in place to ensure that. The programs that we've put in place, we have done a lot to encourage mass transit, getting cars off the road. We've done a lot around fugitive dust with construction sites. Those are major pieces. We have fireplace regulations for wood burning fireplaces. Those all contribute to particulate matter. And they're obviously working because the air quality has changed. The state is required, because they have an agreement with the EPA to run the Clean Air Act in the state of Colorado. So the monitors are actually owned by the State Health Department, and it's an agreement with the EPA that we continue to run these monitors. Obviously, the state does not have staff here. They have staff in the Denver metro area, and they're not able to run those locally. So That's true in a lot of the rural counties outside of the metro area. They typically have an agreement with a local jurisdiction or a local individual to run those monitors. So one of the pieces that I did want to clear up is the city of Aspen does have air quality monitors. These are not the same thing. What we're talking about are state-run monitors that are required by the EPA to assure wear attainment. These are high-volume monitors, and they're different. The city actually has a monitor for air quality that actually samples several different things, including PM10. That actually is, the data has not been standardized for that, so they can't use that instrument to show the attainment for the EPA, so we have to continue to run these samplers. This is what we used when we were first designated as non-attainment, and then when we were showing that we were in attainment. These are the monitors that we're using, so we have to continue to use them. There's a little bit of confusion about that. I know some people thought that the city actually ran those monitors. They don't. When they were on the library roof, the librarians actually were taking the time to do that and had an agreement, but then once it got moved to the Yellow Brick building, it just wasn't convenient to be able to go up at lunch to do that. So I think with that,
I, of course, have a question. Well, I had a couple of questions, but you answered them as far as why is the city not doing this? Why would we be doing it? I know there was a reason for the placement being as close to the corner of Mill and Main because of our issues with automobile traffic, sanding issues. Is there going to be any kind of question or concern as to the monitoring now set back on the Yellow Brick versus on the location at the library?
I don't believe so. I mean, that's a good question. The state approved the site, so I assume that they've looked at it. We've actually, when they were installed in November, I went ahead and went up to the site with them, so they're aware of that. And as far as I know, that's been through the entire approval process.
Just want to make sure we didn't get it all set up and then have them go, oh, wait a minute, you're a block too far away. The other question that was already answered, because I talked to John earlier, was the security issues. I think the public needs to know the Yellow Brick is a secure building for the daycare centers, but the access to this will be on the roof, not going anywhere through the building?
That's correct. There's a ladder on the north side of the building that we actually access the roof through the north side of the building, so we don't even enter the building.
That's another to make sure that we didn't get it all set up and then have them go, you got to move it.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Any other? Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. Will it cost us more than the $14,440 to do that we're getting from the state?
It's the state health department, right?
Yeah.
No. Yes, it will. But this is something that probably will take 15 minutes to actually. These units are basically big filters over a fan that pull air through for a 24-hour period, and so all we're doing is literally changing these filters. I think it's going to take us 15 minutes. There are 2 units up on top of the building. They have to run. One of them has to run every 3 days. So we'll be up on top of the Yellow Brick one at the most 2 days a week to change those filters. It's something that, we come into town for meetings, my coworker Brian and I. So while it's some more work, and the money is certainly not going to cover our time. It's a minimal amount of time. I think the benefit's definitely there. So.
Well, I realize that this is a requirement of ours for being a attainment area, that achieved attainment, and to maintain our attainment status. So I think that that's appropriate, but it does seem that there should be at least some cost sharing with the city at some level. I mean, I don't know if that's something we can work on in the future, but the requirement to be an attainment area is both city and county. And if I remember correctly, the PM10 non-attainment area extended out through the Airport Business Center and the airport, and that was kind of where the county was tied into it. And a lot of it was within the city. And so I'm willing to pass this and move it on today, but I'd like to kind of see us work together in a little better partnership going forward. And it might be worth a report back to us at some time of what we are combined doing to maintain that attainment area. I mean, it may be that because the city is putting so much money into street sweeping, which is the major source of the dirt that gets re-entrained into the sky, that it is fair for us to do this whole part, but I don't know. And so it'd be nice to just get a kind of overview of the whole PM10 cleanup program as well as the monitoring program, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, you know, Rachel, bringing the city in, I'm not sure I remember this clearly because it was a long time ago when they instituted paid parking, but I thought paid parking was part of that PM10 non-attainment plan.
There were a lot of things they got credit for.
Yeah, so there may be some revenue sources. I'm just saying we might be able to balance it out if we see that it's really a cost issue for the county.
From their parking meters.
I didn't want to say that publicly, but that's kind of where it was. Thank you, George.
So there's probably, you know, obviously this is a very small portion in terms of the monitoring
Oh, yeah.
and in terms of our overall activities. And the larger PM10 kind of discussion involves everything from paving decisions to dust control decisions to mass transit. And we've invested massively as a community in infrastructure and such that's, I think, benefited the air quality and a lot of other goals that we have as a community. So it's going to be a big project to do the big picture.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think it will be quite as big a project because there really were past specific things that were submitted to the state to be the plan. This is how we will be a non-attainment area. And so there's other things that may have contributed to that along the sides, but it was a specific plan that both the city and the county jointly had to get adopted.
Well, and that's fair, but then we've also, because we've been this attainment area, all our CMAC investments and all that info, that's all kind of related to that. Sure. So, and that's fine. The other thing I'd just point out is we're on 2 readings for a $1,400 item, and you know, we have a number of these small IGAs, and I believe, Jen, it's by our charter that the IGAs have to be approved by two readings. I don't know if it bears any discussion at some point in the future, see if there's any way to, you know, if you guys want to see all these smaller items like this come forward, or if there's some threshold when we're working with another governmental entity that you know, we could move forward with. We may spend the $1,400 in the staff and board time to approve the agreement.
That's a good discussion, maybe for a retreat.
It's obviously not for today, but I just wanted to put it out there as this was a good example of one that may you know, fairly small commitment on our part within the 4 squares of what we do.
John, sorry, Steve, would you accept the motion?
Yeah, well, let me talk first. I
Okay,
just
sure.
want to give a tidbit of historical interest that back in, I think it was in the 1980s, and it's probably right when the study was first started, we actually had an air monitoring station out on our ranch. And since we were close to the wilderness boundary, it was a kind of a control site to see what just the general PM10 in the air would be being out in the countryside and away from the city. And I think we did that for about 2 or 3 years, and as I remember, I think the machine ran once every 3 days or something, and we would change the filter every couple of weeks. We'd get up on the roof of this old cabin there and change it. So somewhere there's probably you know, some data on what was collected out at a ranch on Capitol Creek.
So Steve's saying
Baseline.
he'll volunteer to climb up on the roof of
Yeah.
Yellow Brick at least
And
once
it's
a week.
actually kind of fun getting up there, and then you look at the filter would seem dirty to me when I would change the filter. But then the person we would take the filter to at the Aspen Environmental Health, they'd say, oh, this is really clean compared to the one in Aspen. They would have to change it quite frequently, and it would just get totally black from the stuff they were collecting here.
I have not seen what a non-attainment filter looks like, but I would be curious because I have seen the ones where, you know, we're in attainment now. I've seen a couple of those, and yeah, they look extremely dirty, but it's running for 24 hours. So, I mean, when you take into account that, it's not as dirty as you would think. But
Yeah.
was the Forest Service, do you know who was responsible for that
Well, it was.
unit? If it was Wilderness?
Oh, it
Maybe
was
Wilderness
through-
Workshop used to do air quality monitoring as well in wilderness areas.
You know, my dad arranged it, I know it's when he was involved in the county government, and I know we would take the samples to the city of Aspen.
Okay.
So it was probably the same study, but they just had that as a control out in the countryside to compare to the one in the city. Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, I would make a motion approving a resolution, approving a memorandum of understanding, Colorado State Health Department for PM10 monitoring.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you, Kurt. Okay, moving on to consent public hearings. These are second reading. First item is resolution approving the 2015 to 2018 Community Services Block Grant Application and Plan. And we have Mitzi Lettingham here from Health and Human Services Department.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Mitzi Lettingham from Health and Human Services, and today before you, second reading is the new 3-year contract for the Community Services Block Grant for Pitkin County, and asking for approval and signing today to move forward. The Community Services Block Grant is called CSBG, and essentially it is federal dollars that come into all the counties through the state Department of Local Affairs. They administer this, dedicated to programs that serve folks who live or work in Pitkin with income levels that are at 125% or below of federal poverty. And you see the chart there of what those amounts are. We have had a 3-year contract previous to now that is just ending. The CSBG grants are on a March 1 through February 28th year, sort of a different time frame. And we have actually, for this last 3 years and for about 5 or 6 years previous, focused on nutrition and emergency services with these dollars. And what that has provided is actually monies for dinner at the Aspen Homeless Shelter. And the advisory board to CSBG felt that for this next period moving forward, it would be a good time to maybe utilize the dollars in a different way. Mind you, it's $11,000 to $12,000 a year. That's how much we are allocated due to the capitated number of poverty level folks in Pitkin. One of the reasons for this change is because we feel like we have many more food resources that have come in, specifically since 2010. We have the Food Bank of the Rockies mobile truck that now is actually coming twice to our building. We feed between 80 and 120 families each time, and they just added a second day. We have, of course, the Lift Up, which does provide weekly, 2 days a week, and they have been working since 2009. Very robust program for the public. So we felt like we do have food resources and we could move forward. So this proposal is to fund case management services, specifically targeting dental services, as well as about 30% of the pot being retained for rent assistance. How we want to manage this is with a subcontract with Catholic Charities, which one of the benefits would be we would like Catholic Charities to be coming up here to our building 1 day a month in order to see these Pitkin residents and to help them apply for needed dental repairs. One of the major issues for Pitkin is that we do not have any dentists who take Medicaid. In the county, folks have to travel to our federally qualified health center, which is Mountain Family Health, which has a beautiful dental facility in Rifle, 5 chairs. Another provider is Comfort Dental in Glenwood Springs. But due to the travel and also there are Medicaid debt now does cover some dental but not extreme dental repair. We just felt like we would use this money to really assist those who have severe dental needs, adults. We're really focusing on adults for this pot. Specifically for people to enhance their ability to be employable, to enhance their well-being, and it's already something that Catholic Charities is passionate about, and already they're serving this population. And we've wanted for a long time to have a closer partnership with them up here, so we feel like this is a great bridge to utilize CSBG in this way. So that's what the proposal is about.
So nothing has changed since we heard the first reading, so we're all, and I think one of the things that we brought up was trying to work in the future for finding some kind dentist up further up valley that might be of assistance to these needs.
Right, and there are a lot of community-based efforts going on
Yeah, we
in
need
that
to not
area for
forget
health
that.
access, and so, yeah, it's coming to a head, if you will.
That's an important part.
So, great.
Would you like a motion?
Yes.
I'll do a motion.
It's a public hearing.
Oh, that's right.
It's a public
Thank you,
hearing as
George.
well.
This is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this at this time? Seeing none, I close the public hearing.
Okay, I do a motion to approve the 2015 to 2018 Community Service Block Grant Application and Plan.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Wait for the vote.
Wait for the vote.
Thank
Aye.
you, George. How did you remember all these details?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Thanks, Mitzi.
Now it's official, Missy.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Next, we have a resolution to apply for and accept the 2015 Emergency Manager's Performance Grant. And Valerie, introduce yourself.
I'm Valerie McDonald. I'm the Pickens County Emergency Manager, and I'm here for a second reading of the Emergency Manager's Performance Grant. And essentially what it is it's the primary source of federal funding directed to state and local governments to support or develop all-hazard emergency management plans. If approved by the board, this would be the second year we've applied for this grant. Our award for 2014 was $65,000. We anticipate the same amount this year. We don't really know the timing or the exact amount of the grant award until the end of the year when the state sends us the signed contract. And I also think it's worth noting that there's more pressure than ever on this money simply because of the flooding on the Front Range. And the state Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management has hired a lot of people to deal with the long-term recovery. Any
George?
questions?
A question for John P. Based on your earlier comment with Kurt in terms of spending staff time, I'm just curious why this would come before us just as a request to submit a grant application. I understand maybe to accept it, but
Yeah.
we're not even at that point.
Some grants require ahead of time a confirmation that the body will accept the funds at the application. That's why and I believe this is one of those grants where they look for the elected officials or the body to sign off on acceptance prior to.
Okay, thanks.
That's why you don't see all of them.
Yeah.
Patty?
Did we get our money yet from last year?
Just last week,
Yay.
we got money for the first 3 quarters,
Oh.
and they can't tell me when the last quarter.
Okay.
It's very fluid. I think you're meant to be happy when
You get
the
any
money.
of it, yes. Well, we're happy. Thanks.
Where does this money flow from on the way here?
If Congress approves the FEMA budget, so it's federal money, it's passed down to the state. State disperses the money to the local counties. It's our opportunity to get some of that money back into our community.
Okay, thank you.
Public hearing?
This is a public hearing. Thank you. I'll get this nailed eventually. Does anybody in the audience and the public wish to comment on this proposal? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Rachel?
I would move to approve the resolution to apply for and accept the 2015 Emergency Manager's Performance Grant.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.
Okay, next, we have resolution authorizing Aspen Pickens County Airport customer facility charges. We have Brian here. Brian's been very patient sitting through all of our different things.
Good afternoon, I'm Brian Griefey, Assistant Aviation Director for Administration at the airport. I am here today for second reading and public hearing for the airport customer facility charge resolution. What is the board's pleasure? I think most people are leaving. Would you like me to accept or to answer any questions? Should I give a brief summary, full background?
Same question on the last one. Are there any changes between that you had made to this from when you came to the first reading?
There have been no changes since the first reading.
Okay. So just a really quick summary for any new public who is watching on television. Maybe you could just explain in a couple sentences what this charge does actually.
Absolutely. Customer facility charge is a $5.50 charge to rental car customers picking up vehicles at the airport. This isn't a new charge. There's been increments of it going back to 1998. Currently the value stands at $5.50. We're not proposing changing that at all. The real change in this resolution from our former resolution is including off-airport rental car operators to pay the CFC fee for vehicles that are picked up at the airport only.
Okay. And this is a public hearing. Does anybody from the public wish to comment on this? Seeing none, I close the public hearing. Bring it to the board.
Make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the Aspen-Pickens County Airport customer facility charges.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Moving to our next item, confirmatory reading of an emergency ordinance prohibiting both the consumption of alcohol and unlicensed public premises and the public consumption of marijuana for the duration of the 2015 ESPN Winter X Games.
Hi, I'm Brad Gibson. I'm sitting in for Ryan. Ryan couldn't make it today.
So, could you explain briefly, now the X Games is already over. Could you tell us briefly about what happened at the X Games in relation to this ordinance? I know that there was some feedback in the newspapers and.
Well, the ordinance is very helpful, especially down in the intercept lot, because before this ordinance was put in place, it was really just a big tailgate party, and we really couldn't do anything about it. So the intercept lot is a lot more tame and a lot less alcohol and marijuana come onto the venue because of this emergency ordinance.
Mm-hmm. George?
So again, just I'm sure we'll get a debriefing report once you guys had a chance to discuss this, but just what I've read in the paper, they seem to allude that the tent that we had permitted to be able to purchase alcohol this year may have contributed to more alcohol incidents.
The area that was new this year for alcohol was the concert venue, and we really had no issues whatsoever out of the concert venue itself. Joe DeSalvo, one of his hypotheses was the fact that people were on venue longer could have contributed to the increase a little bit, and I think that's a pretty good idea on his part.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah, I look forward to the full debrief and a chance to really put it together a little more carefully. It sounded to me from reading the newspaper that a lot of the alcohol issues were confiscation during the search to go into the venue, not the concert venue, but the overall event venue. And a lot of that was from there. And later in the night, it's hard to say whether it was drinking in Aspen or happened at the tent, but I look forward to the full debrief. I would make a motion to approve the emergency ordinance confirmatory reading prohibiting both the consumption of alcohol and marijuana on unlicensed public premises and the public consumption of marijuana for the duration of the 2015 X Games.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for their hard work.
Okay, thanks.
Open discussion. John, do we have any items for
We
open
do,
discussion?
and I wonder if we might want to take a brief break because we had the piece of legislation that was brought up yesterday. I know Open Space and Trails was going to plan to be here, and I think we just need to track those folks down.
Is
So-
that for executive session or open discussion?
No, that's for open discussion, then we've got a separate executive session on a property acquisition.
Yeah, I forwarded the bill to John this morning.
Oh, so it's something new.
Per our previous discussion yesterday, thinking that this might be one that, even though we won't have a letter ready or anything, we could take a formal board position to oppose that bill, and then we could work from there.
Okay.
So
There's nothing else?
And then, are there any other open discussion items that we?
I don't have any.
So we need to get somebody from open space down
Yeah.
here for that?
But
Let's
Dale,
take-
I bet you Dale's actually
Can I
just
just
watching.
ask a question so we can use this?
Yeah, because
time?
I would rather be able to break after that item if possible, and then grassroots can,
Break down.
break down, and we can go directly into the
Yeah.
executive session.
I just have a question on how the board is now considering consent actions on the agenda. It used to be in the old days, and so I don't know why it's changed, where we could pull them off for discussion and just pass them as a consent agenda item. It's nice to have a little bit of it's great to have the discussion, but I just didn't know, are we calling them consent actions anymore?
I think we should talk about this at the retreat, because I've raised
Okay.
that question before. It seems there's sometimes, and it's not that, I've got 8 years here, and it's been going on the whole 8 years, that sometimes you'll have almost every item on consent.
Well, we used to have a member of the board who liked to pull every item off the,
Yeah, I think it depends on who's chairing,
yeah.
frankly, but I think it is a good discussion to have, because 2 hours on 4 consent action items seems a little long.
Yeah, and it's funny, I was actually working on proposed agenda for the retreat, and I had that on there as one of the items. And I think there are a number of things that play
Yeah.
into it, wanting to have an opportunity for the public to have items fully vetted on the cameras and that sort of thing. But I think we either need to relabel them or revise our process.
Yeah, just because, when you have staff who sees they're on consent, someone may come and thinking we're gonna whip through them, and I don't mind the discussion.
We figured it out a long time ago.
Oh, you just wait the whole time, okay.
And I remember when I came on the board 2 years ago, we were, there'd be a lot of items on the consent actions, and the board would, George, you were the chairman then, I believe, at first, and that first year, and that's how we were doing it. You could pull items that
Right, or pass it as a
wanted,
bulk.
just to speed it up, and then it seemed like virtually every,
Yeah.
ended up talking about virtually every item anyhow, and we just quit asking if anybody wanted to pull any off of there.
Yeah, I agree, let's talk about it in more depth
That's
later.
fine.
But it's obvious, it depends on the issue. Some things like the special events, our staff needed more feedback, and we needed to have a public discussion about it to move it, and the others less so. And so, it's always give and take, but let's talk about further.
Yeah, and John and I had talked about that, to have that be one of the
In
items.
particularly, we're lucky today, we do not
talk
have a
about.
long land use hearing set, because otherwise this
Yeah.
would really, okay.
Let's see if I've heard back from Dale.
Can we really start it? 'Cause I don't have-
Make that an open.
Just while John's trying to get Dale down here, I could give a quick update on the one bill that went before the Joint Budget Committee, referring to the county veteran service officers, and the Joint Budget Committee has pulled that bill to do further study on it. There was some question about, Millie Hamner said that it was already in state statute that the counties were supposed to provide matching funds for that program, and so right now it's pulled off the table, but I think it'll come back
again.
sometime later. And that other item, which had to do with the counties being allowed to levy a retail marijuana tax, passed out of committee yesterday, 5-2 votes. So it's moving on in the Senate committee process.
All right, very good. Welcome, Dale.
Hi, Dale.
Hi, Dale.
Well, we're waiting for you to get here to talk about well, Rachel, why don't you introduce the specifics of that?
Thank you. And we just received word yesterday that Senate Bill 15114 had been introduced. It's titled Concerning Restrictions on the Ability of a County Government to Exercise Its Eminent Domain Powers for the Acquisition of Open Space. The bill prohibits the county government from either acquiring by condemnation property located within its territorial boundaries for the purpose of parks, recreation, open space, conservation, preservation of views or scenic vistas, or for similar purposes, and providing funding in whole or in part to any other public or private party for the acquisition of the exact same thing. So you would not be able to donate money to a wilderness land trust to purchase property that would be acquired through condemnation as well. I asked that the board be able to take a formal position in opposition of that today, so that we could, in the future, craft a letter, if Dale has a letter far enough along. The key issue for me is local control. There's no real reason to, if a county does not want to use condemnation, they don't. But why make it a matter of statewide concern to limit the ability of counties to use this? I just don't see an issue. I don't know if there was one bad case law, or a case which tends to bring people to their legislators and ask for legislative relief, but I don't see it as something that really is valuable to the state. And I know Dale may be pointing out these processes, or John Ely, but there's a very cautious and thorough state-established condemnation process that any governmental body would need to proceed through, whether it's condemnation for a highway or of a sewer plant or anything. And those are the requirement for a good faith, fair market offer to the potential to purchase that property, to negotiate in good faith. Should that offer be turned down and the county choose to use, or city, its open space or its condemnation powers, there is then protections that should, by dueling appraisals, the original offer to be found not in fair price, there's kind of penalties to make sure that you have to pay more. And then I believe that it's a kind of a review tribunal, or not a jury of your peers type of thing, but of other property owners who review the items to see was it a fair market offer. So I think there's really very strong and significant protections from condemnation and outlines of the condemnation process currently in statute. And I'll leave it there. I'm sure Dale has more to add.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd start out by noting that the Pitkin County Open Space Program is now 25 years old and has never once pursued a hostile condemnation of a piece of property. The single example that I'm aware of where we've used this authority was with the landowner's invitation, and that's when the Pepke Ranch was acquired for the airport runway extension back in '93, I believe. And the landowner has a good reason to want that sometimes, which is that they get an extension on their time period for reinvesting their capital gains under the 1031 provisions of the federal tax code. So my quick conclusion is that this legislation would eliminate that possibility in the future. So it may inadvertently harm
the
landowners' interests. Beyond that, I just say that as an open space advocate, I like to see open space on par as a public interest with the things that you were just mentioning, utilities, highways, and that sort of thing. I don't think that we would ever exercise this authority cavalierly, and the open space board's bylaws require that if it's going to recommend that course to the county commissioners, it requires 4 votes in favor. So
we've added a little layer to slow it down as well. Nonetheless, I think that it's an arrow that should be in our quiver. And there may come a time if we're being held hostage on a piece of open space that's an in-holding somewhere or another situation where there'd be a compelling public interest. I think it's an important piece of authority to protect.
Agreed.
I kind of thought that our tenor yesterday was to support, to oppose this bill, and I'm still in that position. And I know we had extensive discussions with open space many years ago about smuggler and condemnation, and we went through the whole thing with open space and with the board itself. And it is something we should have the ability to talk about and use if and when absolutely necessary.
I would make a motion that our board formally oppose Senate Bill 15114 and instruct our staff to craft a nice 1.5 page bullet point letter of our reasons for opposition, including the value of friendly condemnation to landowners and the expectations, I would say, of the public that this money will be well shepherded and cautiously used, but that at the end of the day, it's the potential of the taxpayer, not the county, that you are stripping of this ability and setting up a situation where the taxpayers may have to pay 10 times the real fair market value of a property. It's not the county, it's the taxpayers of the county who may be considering such an acquisition.
Is that your entire motion?
I know. So your motion's to oppose and write a
To
letter?
include at least those 2 bullet points.
So the motion's to oppose and write a letter?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I would definitely want to support that motion, Rachel. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great.
Now, would that have been a consent motion or a?
Yes, it would have been the way the
It
consent
would have been a
motion's
consent.
gone.
And without it being in the motion, that once we have such a letter crafted, we are able to send it to our representatives, to Colorado County, Inc., and the members of the appropriate committee who will be hearing this bill in February.
So we need it as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think the notice was it was going to be heard around February 3rd or something is when it's set for committee now, but that can change.
And signed by the chair?
Yes, it will be heard in the local government committee on February 3rd at 1:30. So we just need to have something back out by then, which is...
I will be leaving town day after tomorrow, so I can't sign anything.
So the vice chair.
Do they have a copy of your electronic signature yet?
Oh, they do for the
For the paycheck.
Yeah.
paychecks.
We may need to do it that way because I'm also leaving to go down to Denver. I will be back on Monday, but I don't think we need to hold it up for an ink signature.
Well, anybody.
And if it were ready tomorrow or Friday, I could zip up here and sign it too.
Yeah, that's a lot of zipping for you for your travel.
If it's acceptable to the board, why not any one of you?
I'm right here in town, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John and I discussed it a little earlier, and John recommended we ought to see what CCI knows about this.
Yeah, the CCI process unfortunately is a little awkward in that the subcommittees only meet every month. And so this was not introduced when we took our positions last week. And CCI will not be taking positions on bills again until the 12th or 13th. And so they may be able to give you some background information, but there is no formal CCI position at this time.
As far as I know, the most notorious example of an open space acquisition was when Telluride did that with the valley floor over there. Maybe notorious is the wrong word, most famous. But I believe Boulder County has...
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Very rare
Yeah.
that it's actually been...
Yeah, I do not know what the record is or what, again, is generating this bill, so any avenues that you have to check it out, Conservation Colorado, or we've been received outreach from some of our colleagues in Summit County who are concerned about the bill, would like to see it die a peaceful death, and so maybe there's more background there.
Okay.
But I'm available if you need me.
Okay.
That's all
thanks.
staff has, I think, for.
Would you like a motion to adjourn?
No, we need a motion.
Oh, motion to go.
Into executive session
we keep our regular
For the
meeting
purpose
open?
of property acquisitions, and John Ely, if you could give me the revised statute numbers.
Certainly, Steve. This would be pursuant to CRS Section 24-6-4024A.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Where do we do that now?